If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 10 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis due to a bird strike into Busch Stadium. In the area code 314, it will be a burning bush, as described in Exodus 3:14, on November 27th, 2024. She will be replaced by Michelle Obama, and then Barack Obama will replace Michelle. I am predicting that former President Jimmy Carter will die on November 4th, and that his prophetic funeral, in which Trump will sit next to Obama, will be on November 8th. It is predicted that President Trump will die from a heart attack on January 1st, 2025. It is also predicted that Trump's heart attack will be triggered by a directed energy weapon that will target Trump through Bluetooth technology. The components inside the pointy thing that Trump took will facilitate this, and it is believed that when Barack Obama is sitting next to Trump at Jimmy Carter's funeral, Obama will obtain Trump's Bluetooth MAC address, which will be used to target Trump with a directed energy weapon. I am predicting that dirty bombs will explode in Manhattan, New York City, and there will be a large-scale evacuation on December 16th. I am predicting that Israel will bomb Iran on December 17th. Israel will nuke and completely destroy Damascus, Syria on December 26th, 2024. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on November 8th, 2024. It is predicted that after Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash, Joe Biden will appoint Michelle Obama as his vice president. On December 17th, the Democrat Party will use their electoral votes to make Michelle Obama the president-elect. It is predicted that on either December 22nd or 25th, Joe Biden will suffer a stroke. It is predicted that on December 26, 2024, Joe Biden will step down and Vice President Michelle Obama will become the 47th president. It is predicted that on December 26th, Michelle Obama will appoint Barack Obama as the 51st vice president. On January 12, 2025, Michelle Obama will step down and Barack Obama will become the 48th president. His public inauguration ceremony will be on January 20th, 2025. It is predicted that on April 20th, 2025, there will be an outbreak of monkeypox or Marburg disease or both. April 20th will be a symbolic beginning to a new pandemic. June 8th, 2025, the true Feast of Pentecost in the calendar that watches for new moons, will be the day of the resurrection rapture event. It is predicted that on June 9th, the day after the rapture, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the fifth trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens, and it is possible that June 9th will be the day Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. It is predicted that on August 6th, 2025, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. The reason for this is that Niagara Falls is Noah's flood symbolism, and the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, symbolic of Noah's Ark. Niagara in the native language means straight, narrow way, and Niagara's Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the CN Tower in downtown Toronto, because Toronto and its tower are symbolic of the Tower of Babel. In a game of horseshoes, the object is to aim the horseshoe and throw it at the metal stick, which is why the Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the metal stick that is the CN Tower. God is communicating that as testament for those who will live in the 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth, the geography of North America will, as a result of a massive earthquake, be divided by a body of water from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi Delta. This destruction will be judgment on America and Canada for attempting to divide God's land, Israel. When this happens, the water in the Great Lakes will spill out over southern Ontario and Toronto. I am predicting that a solar flare will erupt on the surface of the sun and send a coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth on August 13th, 2025. Which will knock out America's power grid and will lead to food shortages. The hit of the coronal mass ejection, predicted for August 13th, that will knock out the power grid will also knock many planes out of the sky. I am predicting that on August 23rd, 2025, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth, which will trigger the eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the east coast. The asteroid will also trigger a mega landslide on Hawaii Island that will trigger a mega tsunami that will hit the west coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be on the Day of Atonement, October 1st, 2025. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived, and more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. If you have already watched this introductory information regarding this explanation for October 30th and Paul Simon, you can skip ahead to the exact 40-minute mark. All right, welcome. This brief introduction here, the purpose of this diagram here is to explain how October 30th, 2024 will be a step. This is being recorded on October 25th. October 30th will be a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date of Paul Simon's death. The singer-songwriter Paul Simon is predicted to die on November 8th. And October 30th is an important, extremely important step along the way. I will explain what I mean. The playoffs, or rather the World Series between the New York Yankees and Los Angeles Dodgers will begin tonight. It was predicted before the playoffs that these two teams would be in the World Series. The purpose of this prediction, or rather video, is to explain how October 30th was known ahead of time to be pointed to by God as being related to the trail of signs leading to the predicted death of singer-songwriter Paul Simon. There are a number of videos that are on this channel that are predicting this date, October 30th, explaining all of the evidence that God used to point ahead of time to October 30th, which is overwhelming, regarding the death of Paul Simon. It was learned last night that it is, or will be, a step in the trail of signs. All of the analysis is 100% correct. I guarantee it. There will be a prophetic sign on October 30th that will be relevant to Paul Simon. And I am more than confident that it will be a baseball sign. That is because, and it will be a New York Yankees sign, and that is because Paul Simon is known to be an avid New York Yankees baseball fan. But more than that, God has used Paul Simon in New York Yankees baseball signs. For example, this date right here, the opening day of the 1999 season, when Paul Simon sang before the game began in center field of Yankee Stadium, Mrs. Robinson. That is because one of the lyrics in Mrs. Robinson is about Joe DiMaggio, who had just died prior to the opening of the season. Okay, and Paul Simon is now predicted to die on November 8th, which will be exactly 1,335 weeks after this date. This is extremely prophetic. This is it's a period of time that is 1,335 days that is at the end of the last chapter of the book of Daniel that regards the end and the return of Lord Jesus Christ, the end of the age. Okay? And that's what we're talking about. The timing of Paul Simon's death is a major prophetic sign, or will be, because he is symbolism for the brief period of silence that John heard in heaven that preceded the judgments of destruction. Paul Simon's first big hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. In Revelation chapter 8:1, the sound of silence was heard before the judgment destruction, and that's why Paul Simon will die on the date E11:8, which hints at Revelation 8:1. Furthermore, this date outside of the U.S. is written as 8:11. And also, God used the dates 8:10 and 8:11, August 10th and 11th this year, for precisely the same reason, as a step in the trail of science to this date, the date it's predicted that Paul Simon will die. Okay, now I want to make this video as brief as possible because I just want to make this video an explanation for how October 30th is a step in the trail to November 8th. Again, I'm going to place this introduction at the beginning of videos that will be talking about October 30th. Okay, and the analysis is 100% correct. And what you need to know is this is how it works. The skeptic will say, oh, you just, pick a bunch of dates and you're finally going to get right sooner or later. That's ridiculous, first of all. Paul Simon is only 83. It could be another 10 years before he dies. And second of all, it's not every date, as you can see, And furthermore, that when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove what I'm saying. And the reasons for how I know ahead of time will prove it. But also, I'm also predicting that Jimmy Carter will die 4 days before the death of Paul Simon. And to get the deaths of these two men right, that's beyond anything comprehensible, really. Okay? And Jimmy Carter will die in the fourth state, which is why the 4 days. One reason. We want to keep this brief, okay? It's also 2 + 2 days. He has 22 grandchildren. He is symbolism for Methuselah in the Bible, who was the grandfather of Noah. Methuselah died at the timing of the flood beginning, the beginning of the judgment, and the name Methuselah means when he dies, destruction. Both of these men are symbolic of the timing of the beginning of judgment, destruction of America. Following the sound of silence in Revelation 8:1 and the rest of the chapter of chapter 8 begins the 7 trumpet judgments, which is why Paul Simon's last album released was 7 Psalms, and it's exactly 77 weeks before it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. The release of 7 Psalms is released 77 weeks exactly to the date Paul Simon is predicted to die, and his death will symbolize the sound of silence that will be followed by the 7 trumpet judgments, hence the name 7 Psalms. And by the way, he was instructed in a dream to make 7 Psalms. He was told the name of it and everything, as he explains. This date of Paul Simon's death will be exactly 7 months after this 7 weeks connection to the date of the rapture on Pentecost in the true calendar that watches for new moons. This will be symbolic of Bridge Over Troubled Water, the rapture. His big song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, is symbolic of the rapture. In the Bible, the Israelites took the promised land, which is symbolic of taking heaven, the promised land, after a symbolic 3 sets of 7, and furthermore, the 3 sets of 7 was really a 7 and a 7 and a 7. I mean, a 7 and a 7 times 7, or a 7 and a 7, 7, which is exactly what's displayed here, illustrated through God's signs. Okay. Now, 7 Psalms was released 530 days, 53. The reciprocal of it is 0.0188, which is the number God frequently uses, 188, to hint at H188, the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Bible Concordance, which is the word that means woe, ! Used in the context of extreme judgment from God. This connects to this date here, which is the predicted date of the prophetic expected, predicted in advance sign involving the New York Yankees player Aaron Judge. as in 188 used in the context of judgment. His number is 99, and in the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. That's why prophetically his name is Judge. All right? This will all be pointing to, as explained in the must-watch video I titled, Harris Will Crash into Ballpark. Her plane will crash into a baseball stadium on November 27th. Simon will die on November 8th equals Obama's first pitch. Okay, in Bible prophecy, or rather in God's signs, pitchers on the pitching mound are symbolic of the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. Obama wore jersey number 5 in this prophetic first pitch that he threw, which I explain in this video. All right? Paul Simon is associated with the number 5 in God's signs. There's so many examples. His name, Paul Simon, is equal to 500 in Hebrew gematria, and the Antichrist's word in Greek is the 500th word in the concordance, mentioned 5 times. Paul Simon released this 7 Psalms album exactly 500 months after the prophetic reunion concert in Central Park that attracted 500,000 people. With Art Garfunkel, he made 5 albums, the 5th of which won 5 Grammys. Paul Simon is mansion symbolism. He sings about the mansion in Graceland, which sits on 14 acres, which is the 5th semi-prime number. And ultimately, this points to the White House mansion that is on 5 acres. Paul Simon sang Graceland in the White House mansion on the date 410, which is at 14, the 5th semi-prime number. And on, as I explained in other videos. And that's why this date that is related to Paul Simon is a game 5. And it is 5 days before the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. Paul Simon sang at Jimmy Carter's inauguration ball. Okay? This date is exactly 5 weeks after this Paul Simon sign, which was expected in advance, explained in other videos, the indictment of the mayor of New York. And that was the day after Paul Simon gave a private concert in New York City, a rare thing for him to do at the age of 82. Okay, and on. Okay. Ultimately, this is leading to 5th trumpet day, the day after the rapture, June 9th, which will be when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm, and there will be a symbolic beginning to a mass demonic possession, which will be facilitated by 5G frequencies. Music is frequencies. A phrase in the Bible says that Satan is the prince of the power of the air. Frequencies are air. Frequencies are in the air. They travel through the air. Music, 5G frequencies, will trigger the components that are inside people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, the pointy thing, which will then trigger delta brain waves and mass demonic possession, which is symbolized, or rather the movie The Shining is about demonic possession, and the first lyric of Paul Simon's song Graceland is the Mississippi Delta, as in delta brainwaves, was shining like a national guitar, and Paul Simon dated Shelley Duvall and is widely known to have broken up with her at the airport, as in portals through which demons will cross over into the earthly realm, before she left for the UK to film the movie The Shining, and on, as I explained in other videos. So that's the relevance of the number 5, okay? Paul Simon is predicted to die on the day of the prophetic funeral of Jimmy Carter, and as I explained in other videos, Barack Obama will be sitting next to Trump in the pew, lined up, and Barack Obama will obtain Trump's Bluetooth MAC address that people have because Trump took the thing, and people who have taken the thing, the components inside the thing that are in the people, engender a Bluetooth MAC address. This will be used to Trump's Bluetooth MAC address will be used to target Trump with a directed energy weapon. And it's 54 days because of this 5 and 4 days connection, but also the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which God has used and demonstrated in his signs to be symbolic of oppressive minority laws. And the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, the first black regiment, as in the first black president, were not paid the equivalent amount the white northern soldiers were paid. And this was official policy from Washington, D.C., and it was $13 because 13 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist because it is described in the 13th chapter of the Bible, but also the number 13 in the Bible is symbolic of the Antichrist. And anyway, the Antichrist will use digital programmable currencies, which is why the amount of pay was the story of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, the first Civil War black regiment, and the pay that they weren't received, and that's why digital programmable currency by the Antichrist and the Antichrist system will be used to program the currency to restrict the buying and selling of food that will be rationed to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. I'm trying to do this quickly, okay? This was a prophetic baseball sign. Ohtani, this unprecedented player who's from Japan, God is using Japan for Japanese animation symbolism because the genre of film is obsessed with spiritual possession, and we are talking about mass demonic possession, the culture with their silly, nonsensical characters are symbolic of demons. It's rooted in their pagan spiritualist religion. And anyway, this was the day that Ohtani, this unprecedented player from Japan, playing for the Los Angeles Angels, as in fallen angels, Los Angeles in God's sign, since it fallen angels, he was the first player to ever hit 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases in the season. And this is exactly 50 days to November 8th. Okay, but it is also connected. The Trail of Signs connects this date to October 30th. And the point that I'm going at here is that because, okay, so he also hit 51 home runs and 51 stolen bases in this day, and 5 + 1 days gets us to this date, which is then exactly 5 weeks to this date, this Game 5 sign that we are expecting, okay? And so, in other words, this sign connects to October 30th, and what I am doing is, as in this video, explaining that October 30th is a step. And you need to watch the rest of this video because this is how it works. If God were to, okay, here is the thing. If God were to just tap a person on the shoulder and say, tell the world that such and such is going to happen on such and such date, it would provide nothing for us. It is through the interconnected signs of it is through these connections, through the prophetic signs. And by the way, none of the prophetic signs can be properly, fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs, which is only being explained on this channel. And it is through these connected trails of signs that God is able to tell stories and reveal extremely important knowledge and information that everyone needs to know. That's why when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that every minute of every video on this channel must be watched. That is the point. Now, I'm just going to finish this up here, explaining how October 30th was a step, the date that this video is being posted proves that I am producing this video ahead of time. I just slipped there because I take these things so for granted in my mind that I use the past tense, okay? Now, this date, let's see, what else should we get at here? Now, I'm predicting that on this date, something will happen regarding Aaron Judge, and it will point to the World Series in 1977, which is explained in the Obama first pitch video that I just mentioned. Now, the thing too, though, is that this date is exactly 99 weeks after this Aaron Judge sign, which, by the way, was expected in advance. Well, rather, I expected a sign related to the coming prediction of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on this date. And then the player for New York City, number 99, Aaron Judge, signed his prophetic 9-year contract for $360 million. Now, this was known ahead of time. One reason being is that it was exactly 9 times 9 years after the bombings in Pearl Harbor. Okay? So that's why 9 times 9 years later, we get number 99, 9-year contract. Also 81, which is 9 times 9, is a 911 number because 9 divided by 11 is 0.8181 into infinity, and the flight that hit the first tower had 81 passengers. 360 million hints at 3 sixes, and 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. And also 36 is 6 times 6 and 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number of the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way to 36 equals 666. And this is then followed with 36 days, but this connection is 60 plus 0.00 plus 60.00 plus 60.00% of a year. Okay. And so that gets us to this date in which it is predicted that Aaron Judge, number 99, will give us a prophetic sign, which will be very prophetic, but the more to this is explained in the first pitch video, okay, that explains much more regarding what's going on here. This is just an introduction video. Now, this date, by the way, is also exactly 19,000 days after the day that Jackie Robinson died, and this is a World Series that will be pointing to this rivalry between the New York Yankees and Los Angeles Dodgers, which included Jackie Robinson. But this is relevant because of Paul Simon's song, Mrs. Robinson. As I mentioned here, he sang in the baseball stadium in Yankee Stadium, but also Michelle Robinson, which is the prophetic reason for the song Mrs. Robinson by Paul Simon, who God is using for prophetic signs, because Michelle Robinson will appoint Barack Obama as her vice president, and then she will step down. This will all be after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash into a baseball stadium. Okay, so, and he wore 42, the number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. Okay, and let's see, anything else here? We got 45 days to the day of Paul Simon's concert in New York City. This 1,305 number is about the number 45 because it follows the 1,290 number, a difference of 45 days in that prophecy. And also 45 is symbolic of the end, as is this number. 45, the reciprocal of it is 0.02222 into infinity, and which hints at the second coming. But also 0.022 hints at the mark of the Antichrist, because the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22 in the book of Ezekiel chapter 9, and the 45 is the 9th triangular number. In Ezekiel chapter 9, the mark of the Antichrist would have been a Tav letter, the last and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd out of 22 books of the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. One last thing here, too, is that this date here, the day that Paul Simon sang in New York City, was exactly 32,200 days after Joe DiMaggio crashed into player number 4, Goose Goslin. This gives us a number 4 and 5 because Joe DiMaggio wore number 5. And that is ultimately hinting at this connection here, which gets us this 5 weeks connection to this date, and then 5 days to this date, and then so this is 45 right here, there's a 45 right here, this hints at 45, but also Joe DiMaggio gives us a 5, okay, and this is game 5, and then 5 days, okay, and it's also 5 days after this prophetic baseball sign right here. Okay, now the reason why this is prophetic is because they collided in center field. Paul Simon sang in center field, okay, and this caused Joe DiMaggio to be knocked unconscious, and that's why this is famous, okay? But it was with Goose Goslin, another Hall of Famer, and Goose hints at a bird, and Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash into a baseball stadium in center field after a bird strike. The reason why 32,200 days is because Joe DiMaggio is associated with Marilyn Monroe, and Marilyn Monroe is known for having died at a young age. And she is known for her 2 movies in which the theme is immortality. The first lie told at the beginning of the age is that Eve told by the serpent in the garden that she surely shall not die, which is symbolized by Genesis 3:22, hence the 32,200 days exact connection. Okay, because all of this is leading to the coming lie at the end of the age, which will be the same lie as the lie at the beginning of the age in Genesis 3:22, which is that the promise of immortality without God, promised by the coming demons pretending to be aliens. Okay, and so we'll just leave it at that, I believe. Now, Paul Simon is predicted to die on 11/8, which is 11 plus 8 days before the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a baseball stadium, which will be symbolized by Homeward Bound. She will be homeward bound to her $5 million mansion next to the I-5, and Paul Simon, who is associated with the number 5, had a big hit, Homeward Bound. Okay? And that's amazing. But it is also 19 days, and ultimately this points to the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, hence the first pitch that Obama threw for the Chicago White Sox when in 2005, when they won the World Series for the first time since 1919. But also this 19,000 days in turn connects with 9 days and then 19 days to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, and then she will be replaced by Mrs. Michelle Robinson, hence Mrs. Robinson, and about Joe DiMaggio, who was number 5 and who crashed in center field with Goose Goslin. Okay, so I think you get the idea here. October 30th is a step in the trail of signs. Now, make sure that you watch the rest of this video. As I said, this is just an introduction, and as I explained, the reason for all of this and the reason why October 30th will be a step in the trail of signs is so that you can learn all of the stories and therefore thereby the information and extremely important knowledge that God wants everyone to know. This is the purpose of all of this elaborate matrix of signs. It is for him to tell these stories that are only being told on this channel. Make sure you watch the rest of this video. All right, to emphasize once more, this video was produced prior to October 30th. Even what I am saying is prior to October 30th. And it is known now that October 30th will not be the day that Paul Simon will die, but instead will be an important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the predicted date of Paul Simon's death. So do not be confused when you are watching the rest of this video when there is mention of connections to October 30th, implying that Paul Simon will die on October 30th. You now know how it works, okay? And so don't be confused in the rest of this video when we talk about October 30th in regards to the death of Paul Simon. It is a step, and all of the analysis for October 30th is 100% correct. That will be proven when the prediction comes to pass on November 8th. Okay, a couple other things that I forgot here. This Paul Simon related sign, the indictment of the mayor of New York, which ended up with the raid of the Gracie Mansion, which is a Graceland Mansion, and Paul Simon and all that. This is 44 days. We're ultimately talking about the rise of the 44th president through the plane crash. And 44 days is also 2 times 22 days. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington, who was born on the date 2/22, which is why, for example, the World Health Organization officially declared the CVD disease begins with a pan, ends with a demic, exactly 222 months after 9/11 on March 11th, 2020. And another thing I forgot, if there is a Game 7, it will be 6 days, which is 2 times 3 days, and Barack Obama, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23 in high school. It'll be that Paul Simon will die 6 days later, if there is a Game 7. And that, in turn, will be exactly 6 weeks after this prophetic Dodgers sign in Dodger Stadium, and this, if there is a Game 7, will be in Dodger Stadium. And this was the day that Trump dodged another debate because that was after the other debate, which was rigged. And there was a prophetic fire right beside Dodger Stadium that was seen from the seats in the stadium during the game, and on, as I explained in another video. But it was at an old courthouse, which is symbolic of the coming shoplifted referendum and all of that, right? But also this 6 weeks is 42 days, and player number 42, Jackie Robinson, played his career with the Los Angeles Dodgers. That's also why this will be relevant. If there is a Game 7, there could be something more that will point back to Jackie Robinson, and if so, it will be a hint at Michelle Robinson, who will bring appoint Barack Obama as her vice president, and then step down and make Barack Obama the president. By the way, what I really meant to say regarding the significance of the fire of the old courthouse next to the Dodger Stadium, it's communicating the upcoming constitutional crisis. All right, before we begin this video, that we'll talk about how it is known ahead of time that Paul Simon, the famous singer-songwriter, will die on November 8th. It needs to be explained how God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It's an interconnected web, and none of God's prophetic signs, which, by the way, Jesus commanded his disciples to watch for, can be fully or properly understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. It is through this that God is able to tell stories. And this connecting of signs engenders trails of signs that, in fact, have steps in the trail. All right? For example, and by the way, the reason why God does this is because it is through this that he can tell stories, and really profound stories that reveal extremely important knowledge and information that everyone needs to know. It's quite different than if you were to tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, tell the world that this is going to happen on such and such date. That would essentially give us nothing compared to what God is doing in his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And one such date that was a step, that was known in advance to be expected for being relevant to the coming death of Paul Simon, was March 6th. There are about 10 other videos that tell the stories, the amazing beyond words and extremely important stories that God told regarding Paul Simon that led to March 6th, 2024. Okay? And there are now 3 videos or so. There's the videos, the few videos that come after March 6th explain how the trail of signs leads on from March 6th to November 8th, the date it is now predicted that Paul Simon will die. Okay, but if you only listen to those videos, the ones that will be recently posted, you will have missed everything, or most things, about Paul Simon. You won't know these stories that God has been telling through his big picture of signs about Paul Simon. I can't stress enough what a shame that would be, but it's not only a shame, there's essential knowledge that you need to know. And so what I am saying is that go back into the video catalog after the prediction comes to pass and watch the other videos that show and demonstrate and explain how God was leading to March 6th, 2024. In other words, the thumbnail will say that Paul Simon is predicted to die on March 6th, and those videos are 100% correct. The signs we received on March 6th confirmed all of the analysis. Like I'm saying, it's a step in the trail of signs. And the signs that occurred on March 6th are amazing, and they are completely relevant to Paul Simon, as you will see. The wise person will recognize that when the prediction comes to pass, they will know that they need to watch every single minute of every video on this channel, and including specifically all of the Paul Simon videos. Okay? The big picture comes together as more pieces of the puzzle come and it becomes clearer, but the stories that God is telling are told in the videos that predict Paul Simon will die on March 6th. So make sure you watch those other videos too. There's like 8 or 10 other videos. If you have already watched this introductory information in the other video, you can skip ahead to exactly the 2-hour and 40-minute mark. All right, I am very excited to explain this diagram. First thing to be said here is that this diagram is outlining some of the connections in the very end of the trail regarding Paul Simon. The other Paul Simon videos that I have just mentioned need to be watched explain how this trail is developed to get to this point. In other words, I was talking about March 6th, which is this date right here, March 6th, 2024. And this diagram doesn't explain at all the connections regarding the Paul Simon Trail of Signs leading to this, except for a couple of things. All right? So, a few things. But anyway, the point is that this is a brilliant... What word can I use to describe God's signs? As the creativity is unparalleled because He's God. So, okay. So what we have here is this trail of signs coming down to August 10th and 11th. The reason for this is because this hints at Revelation chapter 8, verses 1. Both of these dates, August 10th and 11th, hint at this. Revelation chapter 8:1, where it describes before the seven judgments of the trumpet judgments in Revelation chapter 8. This chapter begins with there being a brief moment of silence that, quote unquote, for about a half hour, unquote, in heaven. So there's this, in other words, sound of silence that the author John is recording. John is experiencing a brief sound of silence in heaven before the seven trumpet judgments begin. This is why, at the age of 81, which hints at Revelation 8:1, Paul Simon released his most recent album, 7 Psalms. And as I've mentioned before in other videos, Paul Simon says in all of the interviews, he explains how the inspiration for this most recent album came and where the name for the album came, and it was through a dream. He doesn't mention the name God or the word God, but he alludes to it. He got the commandment, the direction, the voice told him in a dream, you are now working on the 7 Psalms. You are now working on 7 Psalms. He has the note that he took I guess at the time of the dream, and he has it framed. He shows the reporters it, this is all how the album began. Well, anyway, he released the album at the age of 81, which is what the age, or rather the date, as I'm saying, 8:10 and 8:1 hints at Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence, which is, of course, Paul Simon's big first hit. And speaking of this and inspiration, Paul Simon has said that this was one of the few songs that he didn't really write. He said the song just, as he puts it, flowed through him. He says something to that effect anyway. That the song just channeled through him. I don't know if he uses the word channel, but he says it just he was like a conduit for the song. Okay, so all right, for the next while, I'm going to be switching, not frequently, maybe even only once or twice, between this diagram here and this diagram here. As you can see, they are the same diagram, except this one was made in August, and this one is being made, well, it was made days ago, but I'm recording this video on September 9th. All right, so in other words, this diagram here is updated. In other words, God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections continually develops. It's not a static thing, and the developing of the big picture provides more information and a clearer understanding of the big picture. Pretty simple, right? And so that's why we have so much more astounding information to share with this diagram after the explanation that I have already recorded regarding this part of the diagram. Okay, so in other words, I'm going to explain this diagram here, and then after, I'm going to explain the other things in the diagram, the updated diagram. Okay, it's mind-boggling, all of the information, and so let's get started. This date here was known ahead of time to be the date for Paul Simon. Understandably, it was believed that it would be the date on which Paul Simon would die, but because of the overwhelming connections from the Paul Simon trail of signs that was pointing to it. And all of the analysis was confirmed with the specific prophetic signs that occurred on the state, which I'll explain. But if you are a skeptic after I explain the prophetic signs that are relevant to Paul Simon that occurred on the state that confirm all of the analysis, fair enough. But when the prediction comes to pass that he will die on August 19th, 9 days later, then it'll prove everything that I am saying. And that is the purpose of the prediction. That is from God. It is to prove the things that I am saying. And believe me, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God, and why God has given me a voice through this prediction furthermore, and it is to prove the things that I am saying, including the description of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. Okay, so some background needs to be explained. It's been explained in another video or two, I'm sure. I mean, at least one. I know the one that I'm even thinking of. But we need to tie in this basketball player who is in his rookie year. He's this standout basketball player. He's the talk of the league. I'm sure he won the Rookie of the Year, and he's considered to be the new great in the NBA. His name is Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama. All right, now there's so much to say regarding this basketball player and the symbolism that he represents. First of all, the reason why he's so stand out is because he is 7 foot 4 inches tall. And if it were simply a matter of being tall in the NBA, then there would be a lot of tall players in the, because there are other people that are 7 foot tall. But the reason why there aren't a lot of NBA players that are that tall is because typically they're not that athletic and they're not that fast. They're slow. If you reach that height, you're typically not very quick. But this guy is. And so because he has the height advantage and he is a good athlete, he's dominating the league, if you will. Okay, now 7 foot 4 inches is a number that God uses, or even 74, but this is even more specific. This is 7 foot 4 inches, which really hints at the date that symbolizes America, 7/4, July 4th. And so that's our first clue here that this is a prophetic sign, because the main theme of God's prophetic signs in his big picture of signs is America, God's nation. You could say God's Gentile nation, but that's not even fully correct. America is God's nation. There are only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and founded on the Bible: America and Israel. Some people will have initially trouble with this concept of there being another nation other than Israel, but that is the reality. And America was a nation, I use that in the past tense, that knew God and has rejected God, just like the ancient Jews did. And when the ancient Jews did, after knowing God, reject him, Israel was destroyed. And so the end times is primarily about destroying America, which is what is happening right now with everything that is going on in the Democrat Party, for example. But it's, of course, much more than the Democrat Party, but it's just, that's just symbolic of the destruction here, from which the Antichrist will rise to power and become the president again. Okay, and that president that will become the president again, that will come from the Democrat Antichrist Party, is the 44th president, Obama, which is what the name Wembanyama hints at. This isn't the only example of a play on a word or a name that hints at Obama, but this is clearly one. So that's what Wembanyama hints at. Now, he's also nicknamed the Alien because of his extraordinary size and his long, lanky limbs, arms and legs. He looks like a caricature of an alien, if you will. So that's like his nickname. And for example, right here on this date, the sign we received was the Nike commercial that came out that was about the alien, Wembanyama. So he's the new star for the Nike brand. And this was the first day of the first commercial for Wembanyama, for him with Nike. And they released the logo, because when they have a star athlete, a basketball player like Michael Jordan, they give the player a logo. Michael Jordan's known for the Air Jordan logo, right, with Nike. Well, his logo is a crop circle. So it's literally about aliens, right? That's the commercial. This was released on the day of the prophetic eclipse, the Great American Eclipse. Now, more specifically is that God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, the main theme of it isn't only just that it is about America, God's nation, but it is about the American church, which God is very, very, very displeased with. And that is why judgment is coming now and why the Antichrist is coming to persecute the church. It is because God is disappointed and not happy with the American church, and even specifically the evangelical church. And that's what Nike hints at. It's a hint at, and one of many uses of plays on the word that are in God's signs, on the word Nicolaitan in the Bible. In Revelation chapter 2, Jesus said that he hates the Nicolaitans for their doctrines and works. For their doctrine and works that are a product of their doctrine. And he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on this. The word Nicolaitan in Greek means ruling over the laity. Jesus forbid calling anyone your teacher. Right? There's only one flock, as Jesus said. He is not happy with the 45,000 different denominations, all of which are a product of ruling over the laity, which is paid pastors that have institutionalized the countless errors that produce the 45,000 different denominations that all claim to have the truth. Obviously, none of them do, because how could one of them out of 45,000 have the truth? The reason why Jesus forbid preaching for money and having pastors, anointed ones, teachers, is precisely for this reason, because it would institutionalize these errors that lead to the works that are a product of their errors. Okay? And the first warning Jesus gave, let's think about this. Those that know the Bible, what's the first warning that Jesus gave the disciples regarding the end times? He said, watch, be warned, for there will be many people coming claiming to be Christ that will lead many people astray. Now, if you're reading a translation that promotes pastors, it's going to say maybe the Christ. But the word Christ is simply a Greek word that means Messiah, and the word Messiah is Hebrew that simply means anointed one. And there are other examples in the Bible of anointed ones other than Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so the word Christ does not mean Lord Jesus Christ when Jesus is speaking. He's not saying that many will come to claiming to be him, which is what the pastors would love you to think. Jesus is saying that there'll be many coming to be claiming to be anointed ones that will lead many people astray, which is exactly what has happened over the last 2,000 years. Many people have come claiming to be anointed ones that have led many people astray, including in our modern time, pastors, reverends, priests, bishops, and popes, but also pastors. And now it is more dangerous than ever to be following a pastor. Well, anyway, back to the subject here. The many that will be led astray, well, he's not referring to, we can know that he's not talking about many claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ and leading many people astray, because first of all, there haven't been many of those people, and when they do come, people obviously recognize that they're in poor mental health, and they haven't therefore led many people astray. Okay? So if there haven't been many of those to this date, we're expecting what? An influx of many of Lord Jesus Christ's coming in the next whatever time period you think we have left, which, by the way, is only a few months. But if you think we have 7 years left, okay, fine. There's going to be many of those that'll lead many people astray. No, it's talking about pastors. Pastors are the problem, period. Not period, but you know what I mean. There's lots of problems. But so pastors are the problem, and it's the monetization of the church that is the problem, which is a product of, because pastors get paid, and that's what they do for a living. Anyway, I'm going off subject here, and I've explained this too many other times in other videos, and if you are a Christian, you should know that probably the most important video for you on this channel is the 23 church signs video. So that's the point of Nike here. And I got off track because that's my job, I guess, to explain the main theme of God's big picture of signs, which is judgment warning for the church. Okay, so that's the Wembanyama sign. Now, why is this relevant? 5 times 5 times 5 days? Okay, so what happened on this day, on August 10th and 11th, was the Team USA game on the 10th that went, I think, just up until midnight, but if not after midnight. But I think it was finished before midnight, but I don't even know for sure, because it started, I think, at 9:30 p.m. local time. But the point is that the sign is the game and the comments that Wembanyama made to the journalists after the game. So that's why it's both dates. But that is fine, because both dates hint at Revelation 8:1, which is the point and why it relates to Paul Simon. Now, one more thing before I move on, I guess, to tie this to Paul Simon here. Wembanyama plays for the San Antonio basketball team, the San Antonio Spurs. And part of the prophetic trail of signs is Paul Simon's move and sale of his mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, to his ranch outside of San Antonio in Wimberley, Texas. And that's why Wembanyama hints at Wimberley, Texas. That's why it's related to Paul Simon. Now, this was known before this date. That's why it was astounding to receive a Wembanyama sign on this date, because it was already known, even before March 6th, it was known that Wembanyama hints at Wimberley. And the reason for that is because of this sign right here involving Wembanyama, but also this March 6th date was the 188th anniversary of the ending of the Battle of Alamo, which was in San Antonio. Okay, and it was a 13-day siege. This was 13 days after the Paul Simon Trail sign date of February 22nd, and on and on. Now, the reason why 188 is because God uses this number frequently in his signs because of the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, the word that means woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. Okay, so, and the Battle of the Alamo is about the Mexican army breaching the walls of security, which is symbolism for America's walls of security collapsing in God's judgment. Okay? And in the Bible, the number 13 is symbolic of the Antichrist, but also is symbolic of America, which was founded on 13 colonies. And Paul Simon is also related to this because he has a famous song named America, and also another one named American Tune. He is the 1970s, late 60s baby boomer American singer, if you will. Okay? So that's also why Wembanyama, 7'4", hints at America. So does Paul Simon. All right, so now, the sign was the Team USA winning their record, and God uses records for his signs. They won their record 5th gold, which is a reason or a confirmation for this 5 times 5 times 5 days. Okay? That's relevant to Wembanyama, as I'll explain in a minute. But also, the story regarding Wembanyama, and he was a story after this because he played for the team from France. It was France and the USA in the finals, and France lost. So the story was how Wembanyama lost. His team placed second, and how he scored 26 points in the game. Now, the sign, what makes it a sign is this. First of all, this hints at 226. Second place and 26 points is a pattern that God uses in his signs because H226 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word that means prophetic sign. Okay? But the sign, what is the sign? Just that he lost? No. The comments made to the journalists, which was a warning. He warned his opponents. He said, I'm learning, and I fear for my opponents in a couple of years. Now, don't misunderstand, the end times isn't going to continue for a couple of years. It's more like a couple of months. The second coming will be on December 26th, 2024. So it wasn't to be interpreted literally, but it was a warning. It was a judgment warning because of all of what I'm saying. He's symbolic of aliens. Oh, and I didn't finish this. The reason for pastors being the problem and pastors being what Jesus warned about, because the Bible, the Holy Spirit, fellowship is sufficient. You do not need pastors. Pastors, in fact, lead people astray. You should not be submitting yourself to a pastor either, for that matter. It's spiritually incorrect, and the thing that God hates the most is false religion. And it is false religion to follow a pastor. You only have one spiritual teacher, and that is Jesus. He said so. The writings of Paul that contradict Jesus, Peter, and John, well, you decide whether the Bible is inerrant or not. Those that think so need to think a little bit harder. But the things that Paul wrote Timothy are flatly contradictory to the things that Jesus, Peter, and John wrote regarding this subject. Okay, so anyway, the thing is that demons will very soon pretend to be aliens. And that's why Wembanyama is known as the alien, and why the prophetic sign on the eclipse day was the Nike commercial about his logo being that of an alien, crop circles. So there are many pastors and many quote-unquote Christians that are confused on this subject, and that's an indicator that they do not really have a solid biblical world, and I don't even mean really, I mean they don't, period, have a solid biblical worldview at all, really. And That's because if you do have a biblical worldview, and you will know that the earth is the center of the universe and man is the center of God's creation, and to be a Christian is to believe that God became a man and died on the cross and was resurrected for the sins of men. And so if there is the possibility of aliens, which polls show that the majority of quote-unquote Christians believe there is a possibility of aliens, it therefore means you don't believe that. Because what are you saying? That God hopscotched around the universe and died for the sins of other species of aliens, etc.? So obviously, to be a Christian means that it's impossible for there to be aliens. But as 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 tells us, people get the deception that they ask for. And so those that are believing in the possibility of aliens are going to get the deception they're asking for very soon. Demons pretending to be aliens. Okay? And there'll be pastors that go with this, including entire denominations, like, for example, the Jehovah's Witness denomination and the Catholics. Not that Catholicism is a legitimate Christian denomination, because it isn't. It isn't Christianity at all. It's not a legitimate denomination anyway. It's not really it's not Christianity. It's paganism wrapped in a wrapper that makes it look like Christianity. Well, anyway, so the point is that there'll be a lot of quote-unquote anointed ones, pastors, reverends, bishops, priests, popes, etc., that will be leading many people astray regarding this subject of aliens. Okay, so the Wembenyama is the sign on both of these dates, because he lost the game and then gave the comments to the journalists on the 11th. This was also the day of the closing ceremony, which was disturbingly antichrist, but unsurprising. That's a whole other subject that isn't the subject of this video, though. Now, in the Olympics, Wembenyama averaged 15.8 points. 15.8 points per game that he played in the Olympics. That's astounding beyond words, because this date was known ahead of time, and this date is the big other date. It's a huge date for the Paul Simon Trail. And the two dates are 158 days apart. Not only that, 158 is the 2 times 26th semi-prime number. God does this. He uses the number 52 to hint at 2 times 26, to hint at the word in the concordance that means prophetic sign. So we have him averaging 15.8 points, and then him placing second with 26 points, which hints at 226. And we have this 158 days connection, which is obviously hinted at with the 15.8 points. And we have this 158 is the 2 times 26th semi-prime number, which is obviously confirmed with the second place and 26 points. This is how it works. This is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. Okay, now this connection is also 5 months and 5 days, which is amazing because of what I'm about to explain. But it does connect to the record fifth gold. And again, this date was 5 times 5 times 5 days. And God, by the way, repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And regarding this, the number 55 is what is being hinted at, really. Paul Simon in God's Signs is associated with the I-55 highway, because the song Graceland, which, well, I shouldn't say it, but if you had to pick one of the songs that would be the most prophetic, no, I shouldn't even say it, because there's a few Paul Simon songs that are extremely prophetic. I won't rank them. But anyway, the very, very important song Graceland, in the first verse, Paul Simon speaks about his experience in traveling down the highway to Graceland, which would have been the I-55 highway, because he says also that he's driving through the Mississippi Delta. So he's driving most likely from New Orleans. But if not, he's coming from the north. But he's most likely coming from the south. But to get to Graceland, you drive down the I-55 highway. But there's more reason why that can be assumed. It's because God is using big time the I-55 highway in general, not just with Paul Simon signs. And Graceland and Memphis, I mean, the story goes on and on. Elvis, the king of rock and roll. I mean, this is a big part of the theme of God's end time science, is this area of Little Egypt where the eclipses intersected, and Memphis and the Graceland estate. Well, Paul Simon's song Graceland is all about that. I mean, that's it. I mean, this is one of the biggest aspects of God's big picture of signs is Graceland, the Graceland estate, and the king of rock and roll, and king symbolism, and also the birthplace of Elvis, and also James Earl Jones, who is also king symbolism for his movie roles, etc. So we're getting at the big, one of the big parts of God's science, and here we have it sung about in a song named Graceland, and in the first verse. Okay, so that's another reason why this Wembanyama guy connects to Paul Simon, because as I'm about to explain, Wembanyama is symbolism for 55. Now, the reason why 55 in general, stepping back a level, in a bigger picture level, is because in the Bible it says that the most wicked king in Israel's history, Manasseh, ruled for 55 years. And the I-55 connects Chicago to the area of the country nicknamed Little Egypt. And Little Egypt in the Bible, and Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, and the Graceland estate is symbolism for a king's palace, the king of rock and roll. But in the Bible, the king of Egypt and Egypt is symbolism for the Antichrist and Antichrist system. And the Antichrist, who is soon to become the president again, Barack Obama, which is what Wembanyama hints at, will be the most evil, wicked president in American history. So that's what's being hinted at. And he's from Chicago, which is why the I-55 connects Chicago to the area of Little Egypt. Okay, so how does Wembanyama equal 55? Okay, well, that was established back here on February 23rd, 2024. On this day, Wembanyama became the 15th player to record what is known as a 5x5 game, the 15th player in history of the entire NBA. And I think he was the quickest because it was his rookie year. And God uses records. But he became the 15th player to record what is called a 5x5 game. Now, I follow, my father raised me as a sports fan, but I didn't really watch a lot of basketball. So, but from what I understand, it's when a player scores a bunch of fives in all of the categories. Like 5 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 blocks, 5 steals. I think I just named it. I think I did a good job there. So he got 5, at least 5 of all of those in the game. And I could be wrong, but I think there might even be 5 categories. So it's truly a 5x5. You get 5 in each of the 5 categories, right? So, but he was the 15th player to do that. And Paul Simon's prophetic 7 Psalms album is his 15th studio album. Okay? But also, 15 is a play on how Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president. After it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, it is predicted that Joe Biden will replace her with Michelle Obama and then step down, making Michelle Obama the president, and then she will appoint Barack Obama as the 51st vice president. That's a play on that, which is why the 55, because his return to the White House will make him the most wicked, he already was the most wicked, evil president in history. But it has to do with what I'm getting at with the Bible, with the 55-year rule of King Manasseh. Okay, so now also on this day, we had a Paul Simon sign, which is the clue here to establish that Wembanyama really does connect to Paul Simon. These two signs on the same day. Furthermore, the album, because Paul Simon's new album, the cover art for it is an illustration of an owl. And on this day, we had the prophetic sign involving an owl in Central Park, which is very relevant to Paul Simon in terms of prophetic signs, because his reunion concert, as explained in the other videos with Art Garfunkel in Central Park, which was 9 months and 11 days after John Lennon was shot next to Central Park in Manhattan, where the 9/11 events took place. His reunion concert in Central Park is a big deal. It attracted 500,000 people, exactly 500 months before the release of the new album, the Seven Psalms album. And the name Paul Simon in Hebrew gematria equals 500. And the 500th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Antichrist. Okay, so that's the relevance of this owl. Now, the owl here was named Flacco. He escaped from the Central Park Zoo. And that was sabotage. Someone opened his cage and that happened. So it was corruption, in other words, symbolic of the Antichrist. But it was in Central Park. It was the Central Park Zoo. And the owl then became this famous bird that bird watchers would go into Central Park and look for. He became this famous owl, and people watched his behavior in the park, being a free owl, hunting and all that, right? Until one day he flew into a building, just like the planes did on 9/11, which is why the reunion concert was 9 months and 11 days, which hints at 9/11, after the death of John Lennon, next to Central Park. Okay, so the bird flew into the building and then died on this day, February 23rd. This number, or this date, hints at 223, which is the 48th prime number, which hints at the 48th president, after Michelle Obama steps down and makes him the president, after him being the 51st vice president. This will be how he overcomes the 22nd Amendment, by the way. He will avoid the restriction on being elected more than twice. He will be appointed instead. So that's why 223 and the date 223. Now, Barack Obama is known as the night owl president, in contrast with his predecessor, the early bird president. He was the night owl president. Now, it isn't labeled in this diagram here, but this Flacco owl sign was 3 years, 3 months, and 30 days, which is also 333% of a year, after the day of the quadruple doink. So in God's prophetic signs, we have these other double doink signs, prophetic signs, in which the football being attempted to go through the uprights with a kick hits both uprights, or at least the upright and the crossbar, and doesn't go through. It's a doink. It's what it was first called. It's been coined that by the prophetic Al Michaels, sports broadcaster's partner. So anyway, we have these double doinks that have hinted at not only the two towers hitting, the planes hitting the two towers, which is why the two uprights, because that's what the uprights in football symbolize, the two towers that were hit, the double doinks there. But it's a sign for the double doink presidency of Barack Obama, okay? Well, anyway, that's all, there's more to explain regarding that. But anyway, so we have also this instance of what it was a quadruple doink. The ball, and I think it was right at the end of the game, if I'm not mistaken. Or anyway, I won't get into the details because I've explained it in other videos. But the ball hit the upright 4 times before bouncing back into the end zone and not going through. 4 times. It was a quadruple doink, okay? Now, this date here that hints at the 48th president, a night owl president, was exactly 4 times 44 weeks after the quadruple as in 4 times, doink. Okay? It's a play on the double doink signs that have been a sign communicating the double doink presidency of Barack Obama. But we have a quadruple doink because he's the 44th president, and that's why it's 4 times 44 weeks exactly. But the team that was playing that kicked the quadruple doink was the Rice Owls. The name of the team, the Rice University Owls. Not only that, though, the Rice Owls play in a stadium in which President Kennedy, as the president, delivered one of his most famous speeches when he called for the mission to go to the moon. And the moon is huge in God's signs because it symbolizes Jesus. It is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. Also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon, which is why watching for the timing of the moon is important in the Bible and is symbolism for watching for the timing of the Lord and his return, including moon signs, which is what this Rice Owl sign is because of John F. Kennedy's connection to it. Now, Kennedy died while in office while traveling in a vehicle, and likewise Kamala Harris is predicted to die while in office while traveling in a vehicle. She is the 49th vice president, and she was born exactly 4 years and 9 months before the first American on the moon. America's last departure from the moon is symbolic of America's departure from Christ, which is why America hasn't been back to the moon since. And now I'm getting off onto another trail of signs, another theme in God's signs. But that's the reason for the connection between the Rice Owls and the Flacco Owl sign here of exactly 4 times 44 weeks after the quadruple doink. And also, Rice hints at food. This isn't the only instance of the name Rice. There was Jerry Rice in the Super Bowl 56 sign, because the Antichrist will soon ration the shortage, the food that will be shortaged. There will be a shortage of food, and it'll be rationed to only those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. Only the good citizens that have taken the thing, the proper citizens, right? This will be enforced through digital currency. And anyway, that's why Rice Owls as well. Okay, so we have, I've explained all this now. It's so amazing, right? But it gets even more amazing, more confirmation, which is how God's signs works. Confirmation after confirmation after confirmation after confirmation. So, and that's what makes it true. And so anyway, the Wembanyama became the 15th player to have a 5x5 game exactly 15 days after player number 15, Joe Flacco. The quarterback's name is Joe Flacco. Won the award, was awarded the award for Comeback Player of the Year. This was the ceremony before the Super Bowl in Las Vegas. Joe Flacco, who won the Super Bowl in another prophetic Super Bowl, the Blackout Bowl, and there'll soon be a blackout in America after the power is knocked out by the coming solar flare, I believe in September. So anyway, he played in the Blackout Bowl in New Orleans when the power went out during the Super Bowl and beat the San Francisco 49ers because Pope Francis is the first of the 2 antichrists. Barack Obama is the second who gets his power from the first one. Well, anyway, Joe Flacco, number 15, connects with 15 days to Wembanyama, the 15th, but also the day of the owl sign whose name is Flacco. The owl's name was Flacco. How many owls do you know named Flacco? I've never really, I'm not very familiar with this name, but if anything, it's a surname, right? But there's an owl named Flacco. And it's just so amazing, God's creativity here. So, and the reason again for the 55, as I've explained, it's the most wicked king in the Bible, 55-year rule, but that's also the reason for the I-55, which connects to Paul Simon and on and on. And again, this number 15 is a hint at the 51st vice president who will make a comeback, which is why the comeback award is a prophetic sign for Joe Flacco. It's because of the comeback of Barack Obama that the Lord is communicating. Okay. Now, this big, huge date here, So there's about 8 videos that talk of the trail of signs leading to this date, and I'm not going to update those videos. They're all just as valid as this video. It's because of God's, as I've explained already, creating these trails of signs that enable him to tell stories. The stories that I'm telling you, for example, in this video would not be possible without their connection to the other signs, and it's through the development of these trails of signs that God is able to tell stories through which he is communicating essential knowledge. And so it would be, in my opinion, foolish to not watch the other videos. Okay, that talk about the trail of signs that led up to March 6th. All right. Now, the signs that confirmed all of the analysis on this date is also explained in prior Paul Simon videos. It's the 70s baby boomer generation signs. I'm just going to leave it at that. Okay, we had a number of profound Paul Simon cohort baby boomer generation signs on the state, including a songwriter sign. It was the lawsuit regarding the Eagles singer-songwriter. And so anyway, it's amazing because the baby boomer generation is the generation. It's the generation that isn't going to pass, as Jesus said in Matthew 24, before the coming, before he returns. The parable of the fig tree, right? He says the generation would not pass when they see the rebirth of Israel, because in the Bible, the fig tree is symbolic of Israel. Israel was reborn in 48. Paul Simon was born in 1941. Paul Simon is the very leading edge of his generation, the first. 1941 is stretching it for being a baby boomer, but clearly Paul Simon is a baby boomer because of his role in the baby boomer generation music. Okay, so that's why we had all these signs on the state regarding all of that. Now, one thing too that I haven't just mentioned here, I mentioned earlier how Paul Simon is symbolism for the sound of silence, which is why his 7 Psalms album was released at the age of 81. Revelation 8:1, that precedes the 7 trumpet judgments. Well, the March 6th date, and by the way, this also had a ton of connections from the 51st state, which was hinting at the 51st vice president. In fact, for a while there, I thought Barack Obama would become the 51st vice president on this day because of the connections. But all of the analysis is correct because Paul Simon is symbolic for the 51st state. That's explained in the one of the Paul Simon videos, which you must watch. But that relates to his popular song, Late in the Evening, Latin American influenced song, but also he has a song, Born in Puerto Rico, the 51st state. Puerto Rico, that's what I'm talking about. In God's signs, Puerto Rico is symbolic of the 51st state, which God is using to point to the 51st vice president. Okay, long story short there. And so anyway, 9 years and 11 months. Okay, that's profound. From the death of Mickey Rooney, who was the last surviving star of the silent era movies. He was a child star in one of 2 silent era movie series that crossed over into audio talkies. So anyway, he was the last survivor, person to have been a silent era star to die. That hints at the sound of silence, right? Okay, so I've explained everything. Now you understand the 5 months, 5 days because of the 15th player to score a 5x5 game. I think this should all make sense now. I think I've explained, now you know the 5x5 days. Now in a minute I'm going to explain, because one of the dates in the Trail of Signs for Paul Simon was July 24th. In a minute I'm going to explain the signs that happened on that date. It's amazing. And the last thing to close here with is the 2 connections here. All right, so here we have come to the updated part of the diagram. There's so much more to talk about. It's so amazing. And I have already explained this 5 times 5 times 5 days connection and its relevance to Wembenyama, who, as I have explained, is symbolism for aliens. His nickname is the Alien. This was the day of the release of the new commercial with the new logo for Wembenyama, which is about aliens, a crop circle. Okay, this is relevant. Now, as you can see here, I made this diagram before September 19th because it was recognized through more than just what's in this diagram that God was pointing to September 19th in regards to Paul Simon. And this was 100% correct. Naturally, it was assumed, therefore, that this would be the day that he would die, especially given that we are getting so very close to the destruction. But it turns out that actually Paul Simon is now, God has revealed through the signs on September 19th that Paul Simon will die on the same day as the beginning of the destruction, on the same day as Kamala Harris will die, on September 25th. All right, September 25th also ended up being an amazing, profound step in the trail of signs. Profound isn't even the right word. There is no word to explain how amazing the information is now. But anyway, bear with me. This segment of the video was produced in between September 19th and September 25th. And the explanation will be all clear, but just know that September 25th is a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die, which is exactly 5 weeks later. And then it is predicted to be 5 days after Paul Simon's predicted death to be the date that it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die. Okay, and Paul Simon's album, the first one with Art Garfunkel, was released the day before Kamala Harris was born. And so the two deaths are going to coincide with each other here. And God revealed this through the signs on September 19th. What's astounding is that September 19th, one of the main ways it was known was this 5 weeks and 5 days connection, which was confirmed ahead of time because of this 5 times 5 times 5 days connection and this 5 months and 5 days connection. All right, so that's why it's amazing beyond words that the big sign on the day of September 19th was the star baseball player's achievement of becoming the first baseball player in Major League Baseball history, which is a very long history, to hit 50 home runs and steal 50 bases in the same season, which was amazing confirmation for the 5 weeks and 5 days and the parallel with Paul Simon from San Antonio and Wembanyama, who plays for San Antonio, and on, as I've explained. Okay. On the day, though, Ohtani achieved 51 and 51. He also, on this same day, became the first player to reach the 51-51 level with 51 home runs and 51 stolen bases in the same season. And that hints at adding 5 + 1 days to get the date that it is predicted that Paul Simon will die on September 25th. Now, the reason why all of this is relevant, 51, the number 51, and Mark Robinson, which is another sign we received on this day, is explained in the absolute must-watch Paul Simon, Kamala Harris will die on September 25th equals Mrs. Robinson. The famous song of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, Mrs. Robinson, hints at Michelle Robinson Obama, who is predicted to replace Kamala Harris after her death in a plane crash. This is the reason for the song Mrs. Robinson. God designed all of this. These prophetic songs from Paul Simon that God is using Paul Simon to communicate point to. Okay, and that's why on this September 19th date was the news break of the scandal of the GOP candidate for governor of the 4+4+4th state, North Carolina. So Mark Robinson, big scandal, if you don't know about it, came out on this day. This is all pointing to the day that Paul Simon sang his song, Mrs. Robinson, which immortalizes Joe DiMaggio in the song. There is a lyric about Joe DiMaggio, a very famous baseball player. Paul Simon is known for being an avid baseball fan. And he sang in Yankee Stadium, Mrs. Robinson, shortly after, just days after Joe DiMaggio died. This is a major prophetic sign. That date in 1999. But I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of the explanation for what happened on September 19th. There is so much that God told through the stories, through many other connections, including, for example, Marilyn Monroe, who was married to Joe DiMaggio, and Joe DiMaggio himself, and on and on and on and on. Okay, so what I'm saying is you need to watch the other video to learn about this. But anyway, what I'm just, for the sake of this diagram, explaining is that September 19th was 100% correct, and the signs on the date confirmed all of the analysis, and it revealed adding 51 days. It also points to the 51st vice president who Michelle Robinson Obama, Mrs. Michelle Robinson Obama, will appoint. Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president after Michelle Obama becomes the 47th president, after Joe Biden is predicted to step down, and after he appoints Michelle Obama as Kamala Harris's replacement, after it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash into a baseball stadium on the same day it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. And Paul Simon sang Mrs. Robinson in a baseball stadium. Okay, so that's enough of the explanation. Now the rest of this video is going to explain this diagram like this. I'm going to be talking about September 19th as if it's the date that Paul Simon will die, but please obviously now understand that what is going on, all right? What's also relevant here is that Ohtani is Japanese. He doesn't speak English. He is this unprecedented athlete in the history of Major League Baseball. It's an extreme prophetic sign. Ohtani hints at Obama, the name, but he is from Japan because Japan, God is using in his signs for symbolism for Japan animation, which is obsessed with demon possession. Possession of people, that's Japanese animation for you. That's one reason why God is pointing to Japan, and his signs are using Japan. And that is synonymous with Aliens Day, because it is aliens that will be demons that will be pretending to be aliens. And so, in other words, the symbolic beginning of the alien deception is also the symbolic, or will be predicted to be the symbolic beginning of the mass demonic possession. And again, it's all relevant because Paul Simon is an avid baseball fan, and because of the day that he sung Mrs. Robinson in a baseball stadium, he will die on the same day that it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash that will crash into a baseball stadium in St. Louis. All right, that date that I just mentioned being the symbolic beginning of Aliens Day and the demonic possession day, the symbolic beginning of it. I'm not saying that the masses are going to become demonically possessed on that day. It's just something that will happen on that day that will be a symbolic beginning for it. That date, June 9th, 2025, is 222 days after the predicted death of Paul Simon. I think that there will be more revealed regarding the significance of this number. However, what I can tell you at this point is that the number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, and the demons pretending to be aliens will be promoting the mark of the Antichrist, the thing. Also, by the way, it's known now that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash into a baseball stadium in St. Louis on November 27th, exactly 7 times 4 days, which is 4 weeks. 7 times 4 days after the predicted death of Paul Simon, because the number 7 and 4 paired together like this hints at or symbolizes America that was born on the date 7/4, and Paul Simon's 2 famous songs symbolize America, his song America and American Tune. So this is why God is incorporating this America symbolism into the Paul Simon signs. All right, for the next while, I'm going to explain the additions to this diagram that I haven't explained yet. And then after that, I will explain what happened briefly on September 25th, 2024, that leads and reveals adding the exact 5 weeks to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die and the 5 days. I'll explain this after I explain the rest of this diagram. All right, now let's begin right here, because the last thing I was mentioning is that I'm about to explain the signs that occurred on July 24th. That is still coming in a couple of minutes after I finish explaining this diagram. That information is amazing, and it's a separate part. It'll just take a few minutes to explain, but I have explained it in a few minutes. Okay, so I'll get back to that, what happened here, but the reason why this date was important, one reason, or rather I should say there were other connections to this date, but the first initial one that gave the heads up that this would be an important date relative to Paul Simon is that this date was exactly 630 months after the release of the Paul Simon album. The eponymously named Paul Simon album, released in 1972 on the 24th of the month, which connects with 630 months exactly. This was the album that included the song Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, which consists of a chorus of Queen of Corona. This is important because it's not only hinting at the Corona, virus, that is part of the end times, but also the coming coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth and knock out the power grid in America, and on and on. So it's very significant that Paul Simon has a very famous song in which the chorus mysteriously is Queen of Corona. Because after the song came out, people wanted to know what exactly he was talking about. Corona is an area of Queens, and Paul Simon is from Queens, but the song is a little bit obscure as to what it is really talking about. Well, anyway, 630 hints at 3 sixes, 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. And there's more reason for why that's relevant. I'm just giving you some background as to why some continuity here as to why this date. It's not just out of the blue, in other words. But the more relevant reasons for this, for these connections that I'm briefly touching on here is explained in another video. And like explained in that other video, the date that Paul Simon's album was released here, the album named Paul Simon, was exactly 1,580 weeks after the birth of Paul Simon. That's relevant because 158 is a number God uses because it is the 52nd semi-prime number, and 52 is important because God uses it to hint at 2 times 26, and therefore the number 226 in order to point to the 226th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the Hebrew word that means prophetic sign. In other words, the connection between the birth of Paul Simon and his album named Paul Simon is confirmation that Paul Simon is a prophetic sign. All right. And so anyway, that's the background for July 24th, 2024. It's not out of the blue, and I'll explain the amazing things regarding the signs that occurred on this date and why this 7 plus 11 days connection is extremely relevant. Okay, now, some other parts of this diagram that haven't yet been explained is this, for example. You can see it's a little bit small because I had to squeeze it in, but it is exactly 1,700 days from Paul Simon's last concert. That's prophetic, because we are talking about the end times, and this is the end of the career of Paul Simon touring. He didn't actually retire on this date, but he said that he would no longer tour. And that is because at this time he was 76 years old. And the 76th prime number is 226, which again hints at H226, the Hebrew word that means prophetic sign. And that's why the number 76, just like the number 52, hints at that. So he was 76 at this time. This is a prophetic sign because he was at 76, and that's why he retired. Okay, so that's why the 76 and his age is relevant, because he was retiring because of his age, of course. Now, 1700, and also this concert was prophetic because he sung this concert in Corona, in Queens. He said in the concert that he grew up a 20-minute bike ride from the actual concert venue. I believe it was an outdoor concert. And because I remember reading the story here, and during the concert, he, as the article says, beamed, looked up at an airplane. Okay, now there's more reasons for why that's prophetic, but Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism, which I explain in other Paul Simon videos, okay? He sang at the 9/11 memorial at Ground Zero on the 10th anniversary. He sang The Sound of Silence. But very importantly, sang on the Saturday after 9/11 in New York City for the television show Saturday Night Live. So in other words, he sang to the nation as it was grieving just after 9/11. He sang his song Boxer, which is a melancholy song, and he is, in God's signs, symbolic of 9/11. But right after 9/11 was a plane crash into Queens. If you recall, right after 9/11, in November of 2001, the deadliest plane crash into a residential neighborhood in U.S. history. All people on the flight died and a few people on the ground. It was an American Airlines flight. People were paranoid that this was another terrorist attack because it happened just after 9/11, coincidentally, not because it was designed by God, and that's a whole other story. But the point is that Paul Simon is from Queens, and he is symbolic of 9/11, and we have him beaming at a flight over the concert, his last prophetic concert. Well, anyway, the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11 struck them 17 minutes apart. This is very important. God uses this number throughout his big picture of signs for this reason. Because 9/11 was the big warning of judgment and destruction for America. And it was all about the 17 minutes, because after the first plane struck the first tower, people were watching in confusion, not knowing whether it was an accident or a bomb or a terrorist attack. But 17 minutes later, as the world watched live and in horror, the second plane struck the second tower, which made it a second witness confirmation. This is how God works. This is a principle in the Bible. A second and third witness are required to confirm a matter. And what God was confirming was that it was an act of terrorism, but in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 9:11, the world's first documented terrorists raided the northern kingdom, which is why on 9/11 the terrorists came from the same part of the world and they first struck the North Tower. That chapter goes on to talk about the destruction of both kingdoms, including the South Kingdom, which is why the South Tower was struck second, 17 minutes apart. Okay, so you get the idea here. That's the reason for the 1700. But also, another thing too, is that God, to confirm his signs and connections, will pair certain numbers together. And this is how his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 17 and 44. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections for more than full-time hours, from morning until night, for more than 6 years. And, this is because the main theme of the end times, or rather end times signs, is identification of the Antichrist, the 44th president, who left the office in 2017. But also, the number 17 in the Bible, in Bible prophecy, is symbolic of the Antichrist. In the book of Revelation, we have a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, for example, which is symbolic of the number 17. Also, in Bible prophecy, the Antichrist is defeated on the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement. Well, the Day of Atonement is symbolic of this. And anyway, the Day of Atonement in ancient Israel, when they sacrificed the goats, which is symbolic of the 2 Antichrist goats, Pope Francis and Barack Obama, the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month. And that's also why the number 17 hints at the Antichrist. That's why Obama's presidency, his first term, or his first presidency anyway, ended in 17. Okay, so we have that here with this. Because from the 1700 days, it is then exactly 4 times 4 months before the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. All right? Okay, and which will be September 19th. Now, earlier I explained at length the significance of the 55 and this 5 times 5 times 5 days connection and the USA team winning their record 5th gold and on, as I explained. Manasseh in the Bible being the most evil king, having ruled for 55 years. And I also explained Wembanyama, who was the 5 plus 5 plus 5th, in other words, 15th player in history to record what is known as a 5 times 5 game. And I explained all that earlier, right? Okay, and we also had the player number 15, like I explained earlier, and his 15 days and on and on. So that's why from this Wembanyama sign and the record 5th gold, after this 5 months and 5 days connection, leading back to the 15th player to score a 5 times 5 game, okay, we have this 5 weeks and 5 days connection from this 5th gold and Wembanyama 5 times 5 player sign. It is 5 weeks and 5 days to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. And again, Paul Simon is relevant regarding the 5-5 because of the most prophetic album, if you will, the Graceland album, which begins with the prophetic song, begins with him talking or singing about the central location in God's signs for America, besides perhaps Manhattan. Okay? Which is this area of Little Egypt, Well, anyway, I think you understand why that's relevant. So, a couple other things that are new in the diagram here. I believe maybe this wasn't shown in the original diagram. Let me just... Okay, I was right. This wasn't in the other diagram either. So this 4 times 4 months is preceded, and by the way, again, this was the release of the Seven Psalms album. Okay, and by the way, also 17 is the 7th prime number. So this 1700 exact days from the last prophetic concert connects, which is the 7th prime number, connects to the release of the Seven Psalms album. That's amazing in itself, actually. That's so amazing. Okay, now, again, that's followed by 4 times 4 months, which, by the way, is exactly 70 weeks. And the most central prophecy in the Bible that also regards the period of the end times and the Antichrist is the 70 weeks prophecy in the book of Daniel. Well, anyway, this 4 times 4 weeks is also preceded by this. In other words, the release of the Seven Psalms album was exactly 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after Paul Simon had that dream that I was mentioning before. Again, Paul, in a dream, was instructed to make 7 psalms. And again, he mentions this when he's interviewed, and he even has the note that he took after the dream framed. Okay, so, and he talks about the date. The date is on the frame. It's on the note. It's a big part of the story. It's not just like I'm pulling this fact, like an obscure fact out. This is something that Paul Simon talks about. In other words, what I'm saying is he specifically talks about the date of the dream. Okay, so it was January 15th, 2019, and that is exactly 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days before the release of the album that he was instructed to make. And that is because of not only the repetition of the number 4 in the book of Revelation, but the Antichrist is the 44th president, which is why we have this 4 times 4 months, which is also 70 weeks, which is also part of a prophecy that identifies the Antichrist. To the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. Also, like I was saying earlier, God pairs certain numbers together to confirm his signs and connections, and another 2 numbers that he pairs together are 23 and 44. And that's why it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash 2 times 3 days, which is after the death of Paul Simon, which is preceded by exactly 4 times 4 months, and then 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days. So the 2 times 3 days obviously hints at the number 23. The reason for 23 and 44 is because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. Also, the only president to serve non-consecutive terms skipped the 23rd presidency, just like how Barack Obama will skip the 45th presidency, and 45 is the ninth triangular number, and 23 is the 9th prime number, and on and on. Okay, and so that's why, and the Antichrist, Barack Obama, will become the president again as a result of Kamala Harris's plane crash. And again, I don't think I mentioned it in this video, but the first album that Simon and Garfunkel released was released 1 day before the birth of Kamala Harris. That album is named Wednesday Morning at 3 a.m., and it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die on a Wednesday at 3 a.m. because of that. Because of this. Okay, it's that important, okay? I mean, what I mean is that it's that relevant, the connection here between Simon and Kamala Harris. Now, okay, so this date that Paul Simon will die is also 28 weeks and 1 day after the very important date that I mentioned earlier with the baby boomer musician signs, including a songwriter sign. 28 weeks and 1 day hints at 281, which is the 2 times 30th prime number. Okay? And that in turn connects with the 2 times 3 days. Okay? And also pairs the 44 times 4 months, and on and on. Now also, what's new in this diagram is that the Seven Psalms album was released exactly 500 months, and by the way, The name Paul Simon in Hebrew gematria, and Paul Simon is Jewish, is equal to 500. The 500th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Antichrist. And so we have this 500 months connection followed by the 4 times 4 months connection, which identifies the 44th president as the Antichrist, who wore jersey number 23. In high school basketball, he is the basketball president. He installed a basketball court on the White House grounds, okay, and on and on. I mean, if you don't know that he's the basketball president, he is, okay? Well, so the Seven Psalms album was released exactly 500 months after the prophetic reunion concert with Simon and Garfunkel in Central Park that attracted 500,000 people. Okay, so that's amazing. Now there's more 50s, but it's explained in other videos. Also, the only solo #1 hit that Paul Simon had was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Okay, so it's on and on with God's signs here. Now, this Central Park reunion concert was exactly 188 months after the release of the song Homeward Bound, one of Paul Simon's hits, and with Garfunkel. Homeward Bound, 188, because God uses this number frequently in his big picture of signs as it points to H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. Okay, now, the Central Park concert was exactly 9 months and 11 days after the death shooting of John Lennon next to Central Park. Central Park is in Manhattan, where the 9/11 events took place. There's more reason for why that's all relevant, but I explain it in other videos. But SHOTs are symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. And it also all hints at Revelation 9:11, which talks about the consequences that are coming for those who have taken the thing, including mass demonic possession and a zombie apocalypse. All right? I'm passing on to you what God has communicated in his signs. This isn't speculation. This is what I do. I'm just relaying to you what God is communicating. And when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove everything that I am saying. That's the purpose of it. Now, what we have here, though, is the connection from Homeward Bound, which is also symbolic of the rapture, which also Paul Simon is symbolic for too, and one reason being is Homeward Bound, but also bridge over troubled water, which is what the rapture is. It's a bridge over the tribulation period for God's faithful. But Homeward Bound also connects, as we can see in this diagram, to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on a flight that is homeward bound. And God has communicated that. I didn't think of that. I'm not that creative. God has taught all of what I'm saying, including this understanding of Kamala Harris being homeward bound. Okay, so what's interesting too is that this is one of the first confirmations that was discovered to confirm that this is the date that Paul Simon will die, is that September 19th is exactly 43 years after the concert in Central Park, the extremely prophetic concert in Central Park. That ended, by the way, with the song Late in the Evening. The death of Paul Simon will communicate symbolically that it is late in the evening for America. The time has run out. It is now judgment time. It is late in the evening. So 43 years because it hints at 4 plus 3 equals 7. Again, we are talking about the connection from 7 Psalms, an album that has a theme of death and moving on, into the afterlife. But importantly, as I explained, the death of Paul Simon will communicate the sound of silence mentioned in the first line, the first passage of Revelation 8 that precedes the 7 trumpet judgments. The song Late in the Evening is a song that is known for its trumpets. And that's why it is amazing. We have from this concert with trumpets, because again, the concert ended late in the evening, literally, and the last song was late in the evening. And then we have this connection, exactly 43 years, which hints at the number 7, to hint at the 7 trumpets. And the sound of silence that precedes them, which will be communicated and symbolized by the death of Paul Simon. It is absolutely amazing beyond words, all of this. Now, hopefully this has inspired you to want to watch every minute of every Paul Simon video on this channel. There are other older videos that are equally important and contain amazing information. They're just not all up to date. It's not going to be... So in other words, I mentioned this before, and I say it in other videos regarding other predictions. I can't continually update every video as the big picture continues to unfold. You're going to have to go back and watch these videos that are predicting a date that's not the actual date. Because as you can see in the diagram here, how it works. Like for example, I made a video predicting that Paul Simon would die on March 6th. It was not quote unquote wrong. It was 100% correct. And all of the information and the trails of signs that led to this, which isn't in this diagram, believe me, are things that God communicated for a reason. And so you need to watch that, right? I don't know when you're going to watch it. I'm just the messenger. But what I'm saying is that it's all important. Now, I know people are busy. That's why I say that. But I'm not going to say that's an excuse. I'm going to be neutral about that. I'm not saying, oh, don't worry about it because you're busy, right? But at the same time, hey, God communicated this, and he did it for a reason. And I'm telling you, there's amazing information that you need to know about. But anyway, God will sort it all out. Hopefully you have time. And so we'll leave it at that. And yeah, it's just amazing. Now, like I said, I'm going to explain what happened on July 24th. And then after that, I'm going to get into the original plan for this video. This is actually just an introduction. It's just to get you up to date and to explain what comes after this, why it's relevant. Okay, so you'll understand when you get there. All right, what I'm going to do now, before I explain what happened on July 24th, 2024, I'm now just going to explain briefly a couple of things about what happened on September 25th. So we were expecting ahead of time, actually, September 24th as well for Paul Simon. Sounds strange, but this was literally the case. Before September 24th and September 25th, it was recognized that God was pointing to both of these dates ahead of time for Paul Simon. And then we received this on this day, which revealed adding 5 days, but also 5 plus 1 days. Now, I mentioned before 5 plus 1 days because that's what gets us to September 25th. But on this day, it also revealed adding 5 days, which was recognized in retrospect. Because although it was recognized prior to September 24th, that God was also pointing to September 24th. Now, the prophetic significance of what happened on September 24th will have to be explained in another video, but it wasn't known ahead of time that it would be the case, but it was learned on that day that Paul Simon had a private invitation-only concert in New York City All right. He had a concert in New York City, and Paul Simon is from New York City, and that's important in God's signs. Paul Simon is symbolism for New York City. He, for example, sang on Saturday Night Live in Manhattan, a few days after 9/11. He also sang at the 9/11 memorial on the 10th anniversary. Anyway, so September 24th, we had Paul Simon in New York City. And he doesn't live there anymore, but regardless, he had a concert. And that's pretty rare too, because Simon is 82 years old. All right. Well, actually, he turned 83 years old 6 days ago. So the following day, we had another major New York City sign. On the 25th, the day after Paul Simon's concert in New York City, was the day that the mayor of New York City was indicted for corruption charges. All right? And by the way, the central aspect of the corruption is alleged to be a scandal regarding the embassy of the country Turkey, which was a clue that Kamala Harris would die the day before Turkey Day, Thanksgiving, because that's a Wednesday, and we already knew from prior revelation from God's big picture of signs that Kamala Harris would die on a Wednesday, as would Paul Simon, because of the album Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., Simon and Garfunkel's first album, which was released the day before the birth of Kamala Harris. And so anyway, on this day, incidentally, Paul Simon is an avid Yankees fan, and on this day, the Yankees game was in New York City against the team named Orioles, and Orioles are a type of bird, and Kamala Harris is predicted to die due to a bird strike, and that bird strike is predicted to be exactly 9 weeks later, which is 7 times 9 days, and the score in this game was 7-9. Okay, that's amazing, right? And Paul Simon is a Yankees fan. Well, okay, so the indictment of Eric Adams included a raid of his mansion by government agents. His mansion, the mayor of New York City's mansion, has a name. Its name is Gracie Mansion. And that's interesting, more than interesting, because Paul Simon's biggest solo album was Graceland, and the song Graceland is about him traveling to the Graceland Mansion, which is why we had this Gracie Mansion sign on this day. Also at this time, we had in New York City a tour of a haunted mansion with Jimmy Kimmel and Prince Harry that was aired on Jimmy Kimmel's show, and that was in New York City, and it's a haunted mansion. And Eric Adams hints at the Addams family and the mansion that the Addams family lives in. The fictional Addams family is about their lives in the Addams family mansion. That's what Eric Adams hints at. This gives us this theme of Halloween, which is why Paul Simon will die the day before Halloween. So Kamala Harris will die on a Wednesday, the day before Turkey Day, and Paul Simon will die on Wednesday, the day before Halloween. Not only that, though, in conjunction with the Gracie Mansion sign, we had People.com publish an exclusive interview with the granddaughter of Elvis, who is the current owner of Graceland Mansion. She recently completed her mother's memoir about her mother's life and the Graceland Mansion. That was on this day too, the day of the raid of the Gracie Mansion, and the tour of the Haunted Mansion by Jimmy Kimmel and Prince Harry. Prince Harry, by the way, the day he visited the King of Rock and Roll's mansion in Graceland was a prophetic sign back in, what year was that? I think it was 2014, if I recall. Maybe it was significantly earlier. I forget. I think it was 2014. But anyway, so that's quite something because of Paul Simon and his association with the mansion. But all of this is ultimately pointing to the Graceland mansion. But all of this is ultimately pointing to the White House mansion, which will be occupied by the Antichrist. And Paul Simon, well, he has a relationship in the past with Jimmy Carter. He performed for Jimmy Carter at his pre-inaugural ball, for example. Jimmy Carter was known as the rock and roll president. And that day, the pre-inaugural ball was the day before, this day before theme. Paul Simon is day before theme because of the brief period of silence that came right before the trumpet judgments. And that's why Paul Simon is known for his big hit that involves trumpets, for that matter, which is late in the evening, which is symbolic of time running out before judgment and destruction of America. Now, the day that Paul Simon had his concert in New York City was exactly 32,200 days after the big collision between Joe DiMaggio and another player, a Hall of Famer named Goose Goslin, that knocked Joe DiMaggio unconscious. This collision with Goose Goslin is a hint at a bird strike. Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash after a bird strike, and then her plane is predicted to crash into a baseball stadium. Paul Simon sang Mrs. Robinson with its lyric about Joe DiMaggio in a baseball stadium in New York City, which is why he had a private concert exactly 32,200 days after the collision with Joe DiMaggio. Why is 32,200 days relevant? That's relevant because of Joe DiMaggio's association with Marilyn Monroe, who, the big thing about her is how she died at a very early age. That's relevant, this theme of her dying at an early age, prematurely, if you will, because of the two movies that she starred in which the theme was immortality, including a comedy named Monkey Business, which hints at monkeypox, and The Coming Lie, that will be the parallel everything comes full circle lie. That was the first lie ever told. The first lie ever told will be the same lie as the last lie at the end of the age. The beginning of the age began with the lie in the Garden of Eden with the serpent telling Eve that she shall surely not die. And in Genesis 3:22, we have this mention of immortality without God. And that's why it is a lie. There is only one way, one road to eternal life, and that is through Jesus and his teachings, because Jesus is God. And so that's why 32,200 days. It hints at Genesis 3:22. Okay, so I think I've explained enough here for now. Other videos will explain much more why this is relevant, what happened on September 25th. But also, the White House mansion sits on 5 acres. And at this point in this video, I have explained how it is that the number 5 symbolizes Paul Simon. And that's why exactly 5 weeks from this day is the predicted death of Paul Simon. That's why this is relevant. This video has explained more than enough, I think. But what hasn't been explained is that we're talking about the mansions here. Paul Simon, by the way, sang Graceland in the White House mansion on April 10th in this year. And April 10th and it was for a state dinner for the Japanese Prime Minister. And outside of the US, including in Japan, the date for 10 is written as 10-4, which hints at 14. And 14 is the fifth semi-prime number. But the Graceland mansion sits on 14 acres, and the White House mansion sits on 5 acres. That's another confirmation for this 5 weeks after the mansion signs. All right, and yeah. Paul Simon associated with the number 5. That's why 5 days later is the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. All right, for the next 16 minutes, I'm going to talk about the signs that occurred on this date, July 24th. And then for the rest of the video, I will explain the amazing, must-watch, must-be-learned stories of signs and trails of signs that led to July 24th. So stay tuned. There's so much more amazing information to come. We're just getting started. All right, this will be a brief explanation for the prophetic signs that occurred on July 24th that were expected in advance of July 24th regarding the predicted death of singer-songwriter Paul Simon. In other words, God's big picture of signs, his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, was pointing overwhelmingly to this date ahead of time, and it ended up being another step in the trail of signs, and this is how his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. As I say in other videos, I say the reason why God does this is because it would be one thing for him to tap someone on the shoulder and say, tell the world that this and such is going to happen on such and such date. But that would be essentially useless for anything other than proving that the God of the Bible is the true God. But even that is debatable because the skeptic will say, well, no, this person understood this through some other means other than through the God of the Bible, some sort of collective consciousness, malarkey or something to that effect. But the true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections through which God is able to tell stories. This is why he does this. It is through these stories, or rather these interconnected signs, and none of the prophetic signs can be properly and fully understood without their connections and context with the other signs, and it is through this that God is able to tell stories and reveal extremely important knowledge that everyone needs to know. That's why the wise person, when the prediction comes to pass, will recognize that every single minute of every video on this channel, including all of the Paul Simon videos, needs to be watched. It isn't for entertainment. It isn't simply for making a prediction. It is through these stories, or rather the trails of signs, that God is telling stories. Okay, including this one. Including what happened on July 24th. This is a very important story that wouldn't be able to be told had it not been for the fact that July 24th was not the day of Paul Simon's death, but instead a step in the trail of signs that is leading to his death. I will explain this. Okay, so as you can see, this email was written on July 25th, 2024. Okay, it is now predicted that Paul Simon will die on August 11th. That's essentially because it hints at Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence, the brief period of silence in heaven, for which Paul Simon hints at because of his first big hit, Sound of Silence. And that's relevant to what we are going to talk about here, which is him being this famous singer in the early 1970s and late 60s with this new folk music movement, folk rock. All right? So, just what I wrote here after July 24th, Prior to July 24th, it was expected that either Paul Simon would die or that there would be a related prophetic sign. On July 24th, Joe Biden delivered a speech from the Oval Office regarding his stepping down. His speech focused on the supposed defense of democracy. This is projection. It is textbook strategy for communists to accuse their opponents of what they are doing. It's also, by the way, the strategy of little children. The child that steals the cookie and then is asked if they stole the cookie, then blames the other person, no, you stole the cookie. This is exactly what the left and communists do, and this is exactly what Joe Biden is doing, because it is them that is the threat to democracy. And they keep repeating the phrase how those on the right and Trump are the threat to democracy, when it is in fact the complete opposite. And if you don't know this, hopefully this prediction will shock you and wake you up, which is the point of it. Because if you don't know this, it means that you are really entrenched in your liberal left beliefs, and you need something like this. Because you are wrong. You are deceived. You have believed the lies because, spiritually, because everything is spiritual, you love the lies. That is the truth. You love the lies. That's the truth, and that's why you are on your way to hell, and I am trying to help you. You are on your way to hell because you love the lies of the left, spiritually. Okay? But let's not get too much more into that. But it is projection when Joe Biden delivers a speech that focuses on supposedly the defense of democracy. Okay, we don't even need to get into what Joe Biden specifically has done to ruin democracy, because it isn't only Joe Biden. It isn't, in fact, even Joe Biden, really. He's okay, that's enough. Because you know what I'm talking about. The thing that you can't talk about because democracy is ruined because of the left. The pillar of democracy is free speech, which is not possible in this video. Understand how it works. Understand that the threat to democracy is the left. All of the left, all Democrats are going to hell. They need to repent immediately. Okay, it is textbook strategy for communists to accuse their opponents of what they are doing. This speech was a sign that communicates that democracy is ending because of the Democrat Party. In the climax of his speech, Biden said, quote, "The great thing about America is here kings and dictators do not rule, the people do," unquote. These exact words were said right before. I just want to repeat again that this is exactly projection. He is the king, the left is the king and the dictator, and they are in fact have committed a coup and are cementing their coup, political communist coup. Okay, they are the dictators. All right, these exact words were said right before the clock on the TV news screen ticked 7:12 p.m. There is precision here too, because these words were finished the second before the clock ticked 7:12. In other words, these words were said right at the end of the 7:11 minute. Genesis 7:11 is when the flood destruction began. Also, on July 24th, 2024, the trailer for the new biopic movie about Bob Dylan was released. And here we have the Paul Simon sign we expected. I'll repeat that. On this day that was expected that Paul Simon might die or would die, but if not, there would be a prophetic sign, the new biopic about Bob Dylan was released, the trailer for it. And God uses the release dates of trailers for his signs. This isn't by far the only one. There's many of this sort of thing in his signs. The movie stars the actor who plays Wonka in the new Wonka movie. And Wonka is another prophetic sign in God's signs. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. In fact, that's one of the most important videos that you need to watch, because the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one, not the garbage one, that was the Johnny Depp, Tim Burton remake, that's complete garbage. The original one is a gift from God. It is amazing. It is a gift from God, this movie. And I explain that, and it's beautiful. You need to hear this explanation. In the Wonka Chocolate Factory video on this channel. Make sure you find that video and watch it. Okay, so anyway, the point is, though, that the movie with Bob Dylan, or about Bob Dylan, stars this actor who also stars in the new Wonka movies. Okay, so just giving this more confirmation that it is a prophetic sign that we are talking about. And this, by the way, is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true, and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. The movie also stars Ed Norton as Pete Seeger, the folk musician before the new folk rock movement. Okay, the trailer begins with Norton as Seeger saying that he and Woody Guthrie realized that they were listening to the future of folk music when they first heard Bob Dylan. The article I have linked, and Bob Dylan is a cohort of Paul Simon. Okay, roughly the same age, same time period, same movement of folk rock, the pioneers of it. The article I have linked to explains how Seeger was probably the most effective American communist ever. Okay, this guy Pete Seeger, that's the trailer here, because the trailer begins with Ed Norton speaking as Pete Seeger. So God is pointing to Pete Seeger. And Pete Seeger was probably the most effective American communist ever. And this is on the day of Biden's communist speech, when he accuses the enemy of doing what they do, which is exactly what communists do. Okay? And so if I remember, I'll leave the link to this article that I'm referring to in the description box below this video. Today, we take it for granted that pop musicians are, in general, lefties, and we accept their ideology in their music as the way it is. However, this was not the way it was until communists like Seeger and Guthrie purposefully set out to make this happen in music. The goal of these communists was to have the revolution take America through taking the culture. They have succeeded. This was the communists' agenda in the early 20th century. The way to take down America, which is what stood in the way of international communism, was to take it through not a violent revolution like in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, but through taking it over time through subsuming the culture, bringing down the culture. And that's why they did what they did through their music. And they have succeeded. We are now at the end of the road of their dream, their plan, way back in the early 20th century. Seeger and Guthrie. We are now in the communist coup, political takeover, one-party state. Okay, this is why the release of this trailer that points to the communists of the early 20th century was released on the day of Biden's Defense of Democracy speech. This is the Paul Simon prophetic sign we expected, as Paul Simon, like Bob Dylan, is a late 60s, early 70s folk rock musician. These two men are arguably the most consequential and influential musicians of the folk rock movement. The music movement that played a critical role in the baby boomer counterculture communist revolution, which has led to the modern Democratic Party that is about to become, or is currently, totalitarian. These signs on July 24th, 2024 were 158 days after the day of the baby boomer musician signs on March 26th, 2024, which also were expected in advance. That was another Paul Simon date, a very, very big date for Paul Simon. That's why we received these baby boomer musician signs on the state, including one involving the singer-songwriter for the Eagles and on, okay? So it was 158 days between these two dates of these musician signs, Bob Dylan and these other baby boomer musician signs. 158 is the 52nd semi-prime number, which hints at H, because it's 52 is 2 times 26, which then hints at H 226 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word in Hebrew that means prophetic sign. March 6th, 2024 was exactly 9 years and 11 months, or 119 months, after the death of Mickey Rooney, the last surviving star from the silent movie era. Paul Simon is symbolism for the sound of silence that was heard for about a half an hour in heaven in Revelation 8:1, which is why Paul Simon released his prophetic 7 Psalms album at the age of 81 and will die on the date 8/11, which hints at Revelation 8:1 and his age at which he released the 7 Psalms album. And this is because of the 7 trumpets of judgment that follow the sound of silence in Revelation 8:1. August 11th will be right before it is predicted, okay, this is not correct anymore, the predicted eruption of the sun in Yellowstone is now predicted to be on September 5th. Well, the sun will erupt on September 3rd, but then the coronal mass ejection will hit Earth on the 5th and trigger the eruption of Yellowstone on September 5th. Anyway, I'll explain more about that in other videos. August 11th will be 7 plus 11 days after Biden's prophetic communist antichrist words at 7:11 p.m. This is also 6 plus 6 plus 6 days, which hints at the Antichrist's number in Bible prophecy, 666. There is much more confirmation for August 11th that will be explained in another video. The rest of this video will explain the amazing stories and trails of signs that God was demonstrating that led to July 24th. Because of what I said at the beginning of this video, you should get or understand how it works and why it is necessary for you to learn about what God was telling through these trails of signs that led to July 24th. I explained that, why that's relevant already. And so, anyway, the rest of this video will be about how God was pointing to July 24th ahead of time. It is amazing, and it must be watched. The rest of this video will explain the amazing stories and trails of signs that God was demonstrating that led to July 24th. Because of what I said at the beginning of this video, you should get or understand how it works and why it is necessary for you to learn about what God was telling through these trails of signs that led to July 24th. I explained that, why that's relevant already. And so, anyway, the rest of this video will be about how God was pointing to July 24th ahead of time. It is amazing, and it must be watched. All right, it is predicted that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on July 24th, 2024. And as mentioned, his death will be a symbolic sound of silence. His first big hit, Sound of Silence, which he says actually came from God or was inspired, came through him, is how he puts it. Channeled it or something. I think he even says that. Anyway, this is symbolic of the brief sound of silence in Revelation chapter 8 before the tribulation judgments and destruction, which is the reason for the timing of the death of Paul Simon on July 24th. It is predicted to be one day after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. And as I will explain, there will be a theme here regarding Jimmy Carter. Okay? Paul Simon at the pre-inaugural ball, the day before Carter was inaugurated, sang to a large audience and auditorium, including Jimmy Carter. Okay, so, and he dedicated it to Jimmy Carter. Okay, so we'll be getting to that. Paul Simon's death is predicted to be 9 plus 11 days before the predicted solar flare that will knock out the power grid. It'll also be exactly 9 plus 11 weeks after this prophetic sign. Now, 9/11 is symbolic, of course, of the warning of judgment on 9/11, which God used to warn America of its impending judgment unless it repents and turns back to God, which it did not do. In fact, since 9/11, America has raced exponentially further away from God than it was even prior to 9/11. And so that's why the 9 plus 11 weeks, followed by the 9 plus 11 days before and after the predicted death of the very symbolic Paul Simon. All right? Now, let's get into this. So the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel, is that it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. Okay, so here we have an example of this second witness, these two connections confirming each other. All right. Now, what happened on this date? This was a very big date. There'll be other videos on this channel that are predicting that Paul Simon will die on this date. What I am saying is that you need to watch them. Okay, I'll repeat that. You need to watch them. All of the information is correct. The date he did, obviously Paul Simon didn't die on that day, but none of the information is incorrect. It was a step in the trail of signs. As you can see from this diagram, this is how it works. And when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove that this is how it works. It works on the principle of connected signs. None of the prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. Something that the very, very few other people that follow this sort of thing appreciate. Most people, because they don't know this, are following a fraction of the signs in the night sky, and then extrapolating supposed hidden secrets from the Bible based on the limited knowledge they have to figure out when the rapture date is, just in a nutshell. So they're missing the vast majority of signs, but not only that, these signs can't be properly understood, which is why they don't recognize them without their context to the other prophetic signs. Okay, so this date, in other words, again, we knew this date ahead of time would be very important, and sure enough, we had the relevant signs because Paul Simon is a musician from the 1970s. He is also symbolic of the baby boomer generation, which is what we had on this day, as explained in the Paul Simon baby boomer generation video. Okay, so you need to watch that video as well. On this day, the signs we had, just to let you know. Okay, so to confirm his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God frequently pairs certain numbers together. 9, 23, and 44. And I know this because I've been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections for more than full-time hours, from morning until night, for more than 6 years. And it's simple, although there's lots to it. The 44th president became the president in 2009 and is the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. And on March 6th, 2024, which was a date we were also expecting 51st So God connected to this date with connections from the 51st state, Puerto Rico. It's amazing. But how that's relevant to Paul Simon is because of his very famous song, Late in the Evening, Latin American Music. And there's more to why Paul Simon is symbolic of Puerto Rico, which is explained in the Paul Simon Late in the Evening video on this channel. Okay, you see what I was getting at? The wisdom from this diagram was discerned through all of the other information. That doesn't mean that you don't need to watch the other videos, though. You do. Now, on this day, the Doobie Brothers, a 70s band, released their first album in 44 years, which hints at the 44th president. Okay, on this day, and the Doobie Brothers' name is equal to 930 in English gematria. The death of Paul Simon connects to the solar flare on the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. Also, Paul Simon's birth, as explained in the other videos, connects to the completion of the Hoover Dam on the date 930, over which the Hoover Dam is the U.S. Highway 93. The solar flare from the sun that is 93 million miles away will knock out America's power grid, and the Hoover Dam was created for electricity. The Hoover Dam is a bridge over troubled water, which is the reason for Paul Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water song. Okay, so the Doobie Brothers' first album in 44 years, on March 6th, was the same day that a member of the band Steely Dan died. Steely Dan was known for winning Album of the Year 23 years prior to 2024. In the same month, I believe, is when the Grammys are, which was very controversial because this was a baby boomer generation band winning in 2001 and made the Generation X generation quite angry and cynical about the Grammys, rightfully so, because there were other contenders from the Generation X generation that arguably should have won that best album of the year, if you will. But that's the case. That's how it is. The baby boomer generation is the dominant generation. That's how it works. And the reason is for all of this baby boomer generation symbolism, as I'm explaining, is that Jesus told the parable of the fig tree and said that when the fig tree would put forth its leaves in the spring, the generation would not pass away before his return. Well, the fig tree in the Bible is Israel. And the baby boomer generation was born at the time of the birth of Israel, the rebirth of Israel in 1948. Paul Simon was born in 1941. He's at the very, very leading edge, if you will, of the baby boomer generation. He's technically not a baby boomer, but he is. Of course he is, because he is the music of the baby boomer generation. Okay, and so also on this day was another 1970s baby boomer generation music sign. This was the day that the court case was thrown out regarding the Eagles, I forget his name now. The band The Eagles, one of the most famous bands of the 70s, was suing these other journalists that had his original notes for the Hotel California, all right? And it was thrown out of court, though, on this day. And so that was that was a big story. Okay, that was a big story. Now, the Eagles is equal to 82 in gematria, and H82 in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word to fly, which is why Paul Simon will die at the age of 82, because Paul Simon is also symbolic of the rapture, which will occur at the same time that the power grid is knocked out. In Bible prophecy, those who will be raptured will be said to fly and meet the Lord in the air. All right? So, and of course the eagles are symbolism for flying because it's eagles. So that is a second witness confirmation to the relevance of that. Otherwise, see how it works? Without the second witness confirmation, you don't have any confirmation that this is relevant, and not just your imagination. If the band was named something that wasn't like the Eagles, and it was equal to 82, it would be kind of silly to be talking about it like that, right? See how it works? Okay. Also, the issue with the Eagles sign here is songwriting, and Paul Simon is the if you will, most famous songwriter of all time, or at least the 20th century or whatever, right? He's the famous songwriter, Paul Simon. And this was a songwriting issue because it was, again, about the notes that he gave to these journalists, then claims that he didn't really give it to them and all that. But it was about his song, Hotel California. We could get deeper into the meaning of all of this, but it's explained in the Baby Boomer Generation video. So let's move on. Okay, and so the first album in 44 years is also 4 times 4 plus 4 weeks exactly to the predicted death of Paul Simon, which in turn is 4 plus 4 times 4 times 4 days. In other words, 20 weeks and 20 days. Okay? All right, now, this connection of 9 plus 11 weeks, or 4 times 4 plus 4 weeks, is broken into this connection here, because in the middle of this, we have the date that Paul Simon sang Graceland at the White House, which is a prophetic sign. He was singing for the president. It was at a state dinner. He sang for the president, and that is confirmation, a second witness to the prophetic relevance of the other time he sang for a president, Jimmy Carter, which I'm getting to later in this video here. I'm working the way there. But this is a second witness confirmation for this. Now, Paul Simon has released 15 studio albums, which is why it is exactly 15 weeks from this prophetic sign in which he sang Graceland to the date he's predicted to die. But not only that, though, he has also released 15 live albums and 11 compilation albums and 4 video albums. So 2 other 15s, in other words. But not only that, though, the 15th studio album, 7 Psalms, is the very prophetic one here. The one he released in 2023, which is explained in the other videos, the 7 Psalms. The theme of it is about death, and it's amazing. You need to watch the other videos. In fact, this video is just a brief overview. You need to watch the other videos to get all of the real information. Okay, this is just like a brief, very superficial level of explanation for what's going on. Okay, don't think that you've learned anything really from it. Well, you should think that, but I mean, yeah, I think you get my point. Now, Pulse and Graceland, of course, is very prophetic too. We're talking of course, this hinting at the kingdom, and the Graceland estate, Elvis's home, where he died, is symbolic of the crucifixion of Christ. Martin Luther King died just north and just slightly east or west of the Graceland estate, and the King of the Jews was crucified north of, just slightly west of the Temple Mount complex. Well, anyway, this date that Paul Simon sang at the White House is 35 days after the Baby Boomer signs, musician signs, all right? Now, 35 days is relevant because of the song American Tune that reached number 35 on the charts. But this is very prophetic. This is the song that he dedicated to Jimmy Carter. This is very important, okay? This song, American Tune. But that is why the 35 days connection here. It was in the 70s that Paul Simon sang American Tune to the president who was inaugurated in 77. Jimmy Carter was the 70s president, if you will. Okay, and so that's why the 70s musicians' signs here connect with 35 days, because of the song American Tune reaching number 35. Now, Paul Simon had his reunion concert, very prophetic, with a concert in Central Park with Art Garfunkel. This reunion is symbolic of the reunion between man and God with the rapture, all right, which is why it connects to Homeward Bound, which is symbolic of the rapture, the song Homeward Bound. All right, so this is why the relevance of this prophetic sign here, when the famous owl in Central Park died. There was an owl that escaped the Central Park Zoo and was flying around. It was famous. Tourists were taking pictures of it. The local people were following it in the news, etc. But then he one day flew into a building and died. That hinted at the flying of the planes into the buildings on 9/11. And this also hints at the Antichrist, who was known as the night owl, in contrast with his predecessor, who was known for being an early bird. Obama was the night owl president, and also the first instance of the name owl in the Bible is Leviticus 11:17, and the Antichrist is described in Zechariah 11:17, which is why it was an owl, because it's identifying Barack Obama, the Antichrist, who is predicted to become the 48th president, which is why the owl died 2 times 3 days before this Paul Simon date. Okay, and that hints at 223, the 48th prime number, which hints at the 48th president. Okay, now this date was known ahead of time because it was 13 days after this date, which was also known ahead of time. In fact, this date was known ahead of time over a year in advance. Okay? It was originally thought that this might be the rapture because it was known over a year in advance, and because of the connections, and one of them being this one, because it was exactly 40 years after the return of the King's plane, Elvis, the king of rock and roll. His plane was returned on this day in great fanfare and celebration and ceremony to his Graceland estate. It was symbolic of the rapture in so many ways. And it was, it was in the air, first of all. It had to fly from Florida. And then they cleared the streets in Memphis and paraded the plane down to the Graceland estate. And the mayor and the political seat holder for the county, they declared it Lisa Marie Plane Day, okay? So anyway, it was the return of the plane, the king's plane to Graceland. Not only that, it was Graceland it was returning to, okay? This is a typo. This should be 222. Oops. Okay, because it's exactly 40 years. This is a typo. Now, 40 years because the Israelites were in the desert for 40 years before they crossed into the promised land, Graceland. And they were escaping the king in Egypt, which is what Memphis, Tennessee is named after. It's named after Memphis, Egypt. And Memphis and the Graceland estate are in the area of the country that is nicknamed Little Egypt. And Egypt in the Bible, the king of Egypt, is symbolic of the Antichrist. So they fled, and then they were in the desert for 40 years before they entered the promised land, grace land. So it's amazing. So you can see why I thought a year in advance this might be the day of the rapture. Of course, I knew long before this date that it wouldn't be the rapture, but that was the first initial conclusion, and rightly so, given what I just mentioned, right? Then the sign confirmed all of the analysis. So does, by the way, everything else following it, because all of this has led to it from this. All this is led to from this. This was, and what are we expecting? And this was expected in advance. We expected on this day a solar flare sign, and that's what happened. There was the rare solar flare on the South Pole. Usually solar flares are on the equator. There was a massive solar flare on the South Pole that shot straight into the atmosphere, 200,000 kilometers. It was a high place. It was a very high solar flare. No, you know what? I got this mixed up. This was the day of the solar flare that caused 74,000 customers for, that's it, yes. 74,000 customers for AT&T were without service. This was a major news story. The news didn't really get into what the cause was, except for a few outlets. The cause was the solar flare. Okay? AT&T wasn't the cause. With 74,000 customers, that was the headlines. 74, again, I've mentioned it in another video. The number 74 is symbolic of America. The date that symbolizes America is 7/4, July 4th. That's why 74,000 customers, God was communicating the coming solar flare that will knock out the power grid for America. That was expected in advance of this date. That was astounding. All right? And America is also symbolized by the number 13, and that's why this connection was known ahead of time. And again, or maybe I didn't mention it yet, Paul Simon is known for his song, America. That's why we knew 13 days to get March 6th. Because it symbolizes America. There were other signs as well around this time that were communicating 13, which I won't get into. Now, the reason why 13 symbolizes America is it was founded on 13 colonies, but the 13 colonies in themselves are symbolic of the 13 tribes of Israel. There are 13 tribes of Israel because Joseph was replaced by Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh was the younger of the two, and God had it that he would be given the inheritance, which was demonstrated in the Bible, and that's because of the siblings of the UK and the colony and the former colonies, the other Anglosphere countries, and America. America being the younger sibling, having received the inheritance. America being God's Gentile nation. But these, both Ephraim and Manasseh countries, were used in the 19th and 20th centuries to spread the gospel around the world. That was God's plan. But since that has happened, they have turned away from God, and now it's time for their destruction. And that is why God is primarily focused on destroying and judging and bringing wrath on these particular countries. There's a misconception that God is as angry with all of the countries equally. Absolutely not. The judgment is commensurate with the amount of light and blessings the people received and had the opportunity to know the Lord. The end times are focused on the former Christian nations. That's what's going on here. There will be, of course, tribulation all over the world, but it won't compare and hasn't compared because we are already well inside the tribulation. Think about it. The CVD disease was primarily a tyrannical disaster in the Anglosphere countries. The worst country of all was Australia. Close second, Canada. And so God is also it's God's prerogative also, purview to bring judgment on the Western European nations. It's in that order. Okay, so, and then Eastern Europe too, and the world. So, but anyway, it's primarily America and the Anglosphere nations. That's why number 13 symbolizes America. Okay. Now, this date here symbolizes 13, which is another way this was known too. This was January 3rd, and on this day we received a Miami Dolphins sign, and the Miami Dolphins in God's signs symbolize the number 13, okay? So here we get into the story here. So the only team that had a perfect record, never lost a game in their season, and then won the Super Bowl was the Miami Dolphins in 1972. The MVP in that year of the Super Bowl was player number 13. 13 years later was the 85 Bears. Many people say that the 85 Bears were the best team ever, but they lost one game. And that was during week number 13 to the Miami Dolphins. And the reason why they lost is because of their quarterback who defeated their defense, which is why the Bears were so dominant, because they had a revolutionary new style of defense. The quarterback for the Miami Dolphins that beat them in week number 13 was player number 13. Barack Obama invited the 85 Bears to the White House, and while they were there, he said that this was the best team in history, which put the nose out of joint for the Miami Dolphins, who had the undefeated season, and also the later Dolphins beat them 13 years later in that one game in week number 13. But the day that the 85 Bears visited Obama at the White House was on October 7th, 2011. The Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month. So October 7th hinted at this. But also, not only was the date itself a hint at the Day of Atonement, but it was literally the Day of Atonement that year in the Hebrew calendar. The Lord will return on the Day of Atonement, Judgment Day, exactly 13 years after this. And that's the reason for all of the 13s. The Day of Atonement in 2024, October 12th. And the prediction in this video, the purpose of it is to prove this, and believe me, I know far better than you the reason for this prediction. The purpose of it is to prove what I have just said. Case closed. The day is knowable. The most quoted verse in the Bible that contradicts so many other passages in the Bible is a mistranslation and not in proper context in mainstream Christian culture, which is why it's the most quoted verse, but the day is knowable, and furthermore, there are many passages that clearly says that the day is noble. It's ridiculous to think that the day is noble based on the other Bible passages. Okay, I'm not going to get into it here. So now, that's why the 13s. Now, that's why we had a Miami Dolphins sign on this day of the date that hinted at 13. And it was a roof fire, and that's of a mansion. And God has used the Paul Simon sale of his mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, and all that, as explained in the other videos, which connected to this, okay? Which is why it was astounding to receive a mansion sign, because the stage was known ahead of time because of the connections from Paul Simon's mansion. This was also the day of the bombing at the grave site, at the people gathering at it for the general of Soleimani. And the Soleimani is symbolic of Haman in the book of Esther. And the book of Esther, in the book of Esther, Haman persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month, which is one reason why in the Bible the number 13 is symbolic of the Antichrist, which is why Barack Obama had the 85 Bears at the White House. The 85 Bears and their Super Bowl win began a 30-year cycle of all of the major sports teams in Chicago winning their league's championship. That's because Obama moved to Chicago in 85. And then 30 years later, the Super Bowl was won in January of 86. And then 30 years later, the Chicago Cubs finally broke their curse of the Billy Goat, which is the goat Antichrist curse, and then visited Obama 4 days before he left office and presented him with player number 44, star player, giving him jersey number 44, which completed a 30-year cycle. And in the Bible, 30 years is symbolic of a king, which made it point to Obama being the Antichrist king. Now, 50 is symbolic of the church, which is why the roof fire and then 50 days. Because God has been demonstrating these roof fires, and also especially church roof destruction and fires, including the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. Everyone will know that one. These are a hint at, or pointing to, the tongues of fire that came down on the disciples in the upper room on the first day of the church age. Okay, and Pentecost, the day that this happened, literally means 50th day. That's why 50 days is symbolic of the church. And that's why we had a roof fire 50 days before the fire on the sun. Okay? And this connection was known ahead of time because of this and this. Because this date was exactly 229 days, and this was known ahead of time before January 3rd, and 229 is the 50th prime number. This was the release date of Paul Simon's 7 Psalms album, which of course hints at the 7 trumpet judgments in the Bible that begin after the sound of silence. And this in turn was exactly 500 months after the prophetic reunion concert in Central Park. And the name Paul Simon in Hebrew gematria is equal to 500. But also, the 500th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Antichrist, who will persecute the church, which is symbolized by 50. Now, the prophetic Central Park concert was in turn exactly 188 months after the release of Homeward Bound, which hints at the rapture, and it was released in 66, which hints at the Antichrist, 666. 188 because in God's signs, H188 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe, ! Which is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. So it's amazing that it is exactly 188 months after Homeward Bound to the reunion concert, which is a Homeward Bound symbolism, the reunification of man with God at the rapture and the resurrection at the second coming, the reunion. Whoa! ! Now, here, this connection of 188 months is broken into this. This is the day, as I mentioned, where Paul Simon sang to a concert auditorium in which Jimmy Carter was attended. It was the pre-inaugural ball, and Paul Simon dedicated this song, American Tune, to Jimmy Carter, and he spoke about hoping there would be a new era of, I forget the words he used, but something positive to a new beginning at the White House. This was following the period of Richard Nixon, who used the government against his political enemies, just like the current government is doing. Which is the reason why the prophetic significance of Paul Simon's words here. This is why he said what he said. When he's talking about this prayer, this hope for a new beginning at the White House, he's referring to Richard Nixon and Watergate. And Watergate and Richard Nixon are all about Richard Nixon being caught using the government, the federal government, to wage war on his political enemies, which is exactly what is going on today with the left. If you don't know that, woe to you. Woe to you if you do not know that. I do not know what to tell you. Your time is up. You do not have time to unlearn all of the brainwashing that you've been suffered and been propagandized. I do not know what to tell you because you are out of time, and it's going to take time for you to unlearn all the things that you think are true, which aren't. If you don't repent, you're going to hell. All Democrats are going to hell. They need to repent immediately. They are guilty, along with the powers that be that are using the federal government. They are equally guilty. It's like the Germans in Nazi Germany were also guilty of the Holocaust. They either looked the other way or they believed the lies because they wanted the lies to be true. That's the Democrats today. Okay, so the day that Paul Simon sang to Jimmy Carter, American Tune, is exactly, well, let me just talk about American Tune. The tune, the song, the lyrics, it's a hint at it's about the American experience, but it also involves lyrics that bring the emotion, give a feeling of America's history. It's a song about America and its history. It's an American song, in other words. It's symbolic of America. And it's a melancholy song. So this is why God is using this in his signs here. It's very important to appreciate that America and its history is very important to God. This is God's nation, America. And God is speaking this through this song here, which is why God is pointing to this and using it in this big picture of signs and tying it to Jimmy Carter here. Now, what makes this relevant is that the day that Paul Simon sang to Jimmy Carter American Tune, right before his inauguration in 1977, is because Jimmy Carter in God's Signs is a symbolic beginning to a series of 7 kings, 7 presidents, which are symbolic of the 7 kings chronology in a prophecy in the book of Revelation. This is a secondary fulfillment of this prophecy. It is not the primary fulfillment of this prophecy. Okay? It's a symbolic fulfillment of the prophecy, in other words. It's not the true, literal fulfillment of the prophecy. But there are 7 presidents beginning with the inauguration in 1977, making Trump the 7th of the 7 presidents, who was also inaugurated in a year ending in 7. And at the time of his inauguration was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. And 77 days after his inauguration, he launched 59 missiles into Syria, and 59 is the 7th super prime number. It is the 17th prime number, and Trump was inaugurated in 17. Trump was inaugurated 73 days, which ends at 3 sets of 7, after he was elected by 77 electoral votes, which was in turn exactly 73 weeks after he symbolically began his campaign when he descended the golden escalator in the Trump Tower, which in turn was exactly 188 months. We already talked about the relevance of 188 months after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. And it's because of the Israelites that marched around the walls of security 7 times before they blew Trump and the walls of security collapsed due to God's judgment due to an earthquake. Well, the reason for the 7 times 8 is because this prophecy is about the 7th and 8th kings. In the prophecy, the 8th king is said to have been, is not, and will be again. At Carter's funeral, when the 7th king is sitting next to Obama, Obama was a president, is not a president at that moment, and will be again the president, the 8th king. That's the reason for the 7 times 8. And why Paul Simon will die one day after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. Okay, this 7 times 8 month is also a 3 sets of 7. It's a 7 plus a 7 times 7 months, 56 months. And precisely that's how the Israelites enacted the 3 sets of 7. It was once around for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. This is also why there were 56 passengers on the second plane on 9/11 when the towers collapsed. Okay, now, this date here was the release of the documentary for Like a Bridge Over Troubled Water. It was released on the 50th anniversary of A Bridge Over Troubled Water. Okay? And so 50 again, we have 50s, right? Like I was saying earlier. This connects to this date, which is 50 days, okay? One of the reasons why this connection of 50 days was known was because of the connection to the 50th anniversary here, like I'm saying. This date was known over a year in advance too because of this connection, 1,440 days. Okay, now this is a number that's prophetic in the book of Revelation, 144,000. That will be raptured. It's symbolic of those who will be raptured. And a bridge over troubled water is symbolic of the rapture. Christ, the bridge, will rescue his faithful, and there will be a bridge over the trouble, the tribulation period. That's the rapture, which is why the documentary connects with this number that symbolizes this. Okay? Also, this date, January 24th, gives us a 1 times 24 and therefore a 24, and then a 2, which hints at 2 24s. That's because G, 2424, in the Greek concordance is the word Jesus, who is the bridge over troubled water. That's why also this date is exactly 24 times 24 months. After the release of Paul Simon's album, which has the song Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, which is exactly 630 months before the date is predicted that Paul Simon will die in July, which is what Julio hints at. 630 months hints at 3 6s. This 24 times 24 months is 48 years exactly, and that hints at the 48th president, who will become the president again after Joe Biden steps down. And the word for step down in the Greek concordance is the 576th word, and 48 years is also 576 months. The chorus of the song Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard includes the lyric Queen of Corona. It is on the sun and its corona that the explosion will occur that will knock out the power grid in America. This also, of course, hints at the CVD disease and the mark of the Antichrist that people took, thinking that it would help them with the CVD disease, the corona. Okay, so Paul Simon's eponymously named album Paul Simon was released exactly 1,580 weeks after the birth of Paul Simon. 158 is the 52nd semi-prime number, and that hints at 2 times 26, and the 226th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means prophetic sign, which means that Paul Simon is a prophetic sign. which hints at Bridge Over Troubled Water, Sound of Silence, Homeward Bound. There's so much. There's so much about Paul Simon that makes him a prophetic sign. This video even isn't even scratching the surface, but there's so much in this video alone. One last thing to cover here is that American Tune was released on November 9th, 1973. That hints at 9/11 and the warning of judgment. 444,480 hours. That hints at the 44th president becoming the 48th president. Which again will be hinted at the funeral of Carter. And that's why American Tune was sung to Jimmy Carter. I forget the number of days that this is equivalent to. Okay. I think we've finished this diagram though. And so when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they should watch every minute of every video, including every minute of all the Paul Simon videos. And there's some really amazing information. You'll be thankful that you did. Inspirational in itself, but also very important, essential knowledge that everyone needs to know. That's the reason, again, why God has done all of this. He could have just tapped someone on the shoulder and said, hey, this is going to happen on this date. Tell the world. But it would mean nothing, really. It is through the signs that God is telling all of these stories and this information, like I've just explained. And like I said, there's so much that I didn't even cover. This was just a brief overview of some of the stuff here, and then there's so much other stuff. So make sure you watch the other videos. All right, I don't recall. I'm just looking at this diagram and this video here. It's now October 19th, and I don't recall whether or not I corrected the error here, which is that I left out the main way in which July 24th was known ahead of time, months ahead of time. It's because of this connection to the release of Paul Simon's album named Paul Simon that includes me and Julio down by the schoolyard and Queen of Corona, etc. This connection is exactly 630 months. And that's a number that hints at 3 6s. 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. So maybe I did mention this in the video and I just forgot, but it's not in the diagram, and this is like the most important thing here. And also what was realized months ago before this date, months before it, that it was relevant is that we are talking about the month of July. And that's what Julio hints at. So I knew that the 630 months was relevant because of it connecting with July. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, It would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.